Thank you. Good evening. I will call to order the Committee of the Whole for July 28th, 2021 at 7:01 p.m. Our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our next order of business is roll call.
Alder Allen.
Present.
Alder Arata-Frada.
Here.
Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst.
Present.
Alder Maldonado. Mayor Richardson.
Here.
Alder Strassman.
Here.
Alder Udell.
Here.
Alder Wheeler.
Here.
Do I announce we have a quorum?
You do.
We have a quorum.
Yay.
Very good. Thank you very much. Next order of business, item 4, approval of minutes for the June 23rd, 2021 draft minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
Second.
Moved by Alder Arata-Frada and seconded by Alder Allen. Discussion? No discussion? Hearing none. I'll place the motion to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Noes? The ayes have it. Motion passes. On to the next item, item 5, public appearances for non-agenda items. I don't see anybody in chambers. Do we have anybody online, Scott? All right. We have nobody for public appearances for non-agenda items. Moving on to item 6. Agenda item 6A. This evening we have two presentations. The first one is the Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative Annual Report, and Wade Thompson from City Staff will give us that readout presentation.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think everybody knows me. Thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. I do have some folks with me that I'd like to have them introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Carmen Knark. I'm a neighborhood navigator for Fitchburg.
And I'm Sedgwick Smith, and I'm the 2021 planning intern for Fitchburg.
Welcome.
Nice to meet you.
Yes,
Thank
nice
you.
to meet you.
So you'll hear more from them as we talk tonight. So again, as Randy mentioned, we are here to talk about annual report for what we're calling the HNI. In terms of what I want to cover tonight, we'll talk big picture, and a lot of it will be review for a lot of folks. And then we'll talk about what I call the 3 Ps of the initiative. People, our navigators, programs, our grant program, and then places. I think there was probably some healthy discussion on some places last night. We'll talk more about where those are with the HNI. Then I'll talk about a refill concept, and then we'll talk about future directions of the HNI, and then certainly we can take any questions or comments that the group might have. So again, this will be a review for a lot of folks, but I know we have some new alders, so just want to briefly kind of touch on what the HNI is in terms of a big picture. So really, the HNI is about equity, it's about diversity, it's about components that are sustainable, stable, and integrated. And those 3 ideas lead to this idea of healthy in terms of neighborhoods, and not just physical health, but social, economic, and environmental health as well. Similarly, it's also about efficient allocation of limited city resources. It's about creating social, economic, and environmental benefits to our residents in our region. And it's about building this idea of community. And I think community is really important in the HNI. We can build a city without building community. And I think community are the things that really attract people to our city and keep them here. So community is central to the idea of the HNI. So in terms of where we're talking about with our neighborhoods, we do have 3 neighborhoods in our initiative. We call them priority neighborhoods. The Verona Road West neighborhood, just to the west of Verona Road. The Belmar Renaissance on the Park neighborhood, traditionally known as probably Allied Drive area. And then our North Fishhatchee Road neighborhood as well to the east. I do want to point out, I think folks are obviously aware, next year there is a plan to incorporate portions of the town of Madison, and specifically the Southdale neighborhood. So as we were developing the HNI a few years ago, we did anticipate that. And if and when Southdale is incorporated into the city, it will become our 4th HNI priority neighborhood. So in terms of how, how do we work this initiative, it's really about our strategic plan with very specific action items. That plan was adopted in 2019. And when I think about the initiative, I think about four things. I think about it being partner reliant. I think about it being proactive. I think about it being outcome-based and also data-driven. And again, that leads to this idea of our plan is really the guiding principle to our initiative. And I talked about the 3 Ps. I'm going to add a 4th P to that. So again, we have people, programs, and places. But I think those things are all really interweaved and fit together with the idea of partnerships. So that is kind of the 4th P that's really important to keep in mind as we discuss the initiative. I do want to point out, and we're going to kind of touch on this in various parts of our presentation, but we were actually asked last October to present at the American Planning Association Upper Midwest Conference. From my perspective and my profession, that was a pretty big deal. So the city should be really proud that this initiative was selected for that conference. I mean, again, I think it shows that we're moving in the right direction with this initiative, and really that other cities and regions are wanting to learn from us in terms of what we're doing with this initiative. And I do want to point out that that conference entailed Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. So we're talking 3 states. And again, we were selected to present at that conference. So moving into kind of that first P of people, again, Neighborhood Navigators is kind of the central piece of that people component. And our navigators are basically 2 part-time city employees, as well as residents of our priority neighborhoods, that assist their neighbors in accessing available resources and gathering feedback on neighborhood needs and wants. And I want to point out that these positions are currently solely funded by Dane County. We get about $20,000 a year, which equates to about 30 hours per week between two workers. And to be quite frank, the wage is pretty basic. It's certainly, there's room to grow that wage, but right now we are limited by relying on county funds. So really what Carmen's job is about bettering existing city services to our residents. It's about building trust between neighborhood and the city, and it's about influencing future city policy. And I do want to point out that the navigators are reflective of the neighborhood demographics, so Carmen does speak Spanish. So they've been at it for about 2 years, since March of 2019.
Excuse me, wait, we do have a question from,
Yeah, is the presentation you're doing tonight, is this available online right now?
It was a last-minute prep, but I will have it, I will
Okay.
email it to the council, and we'll certainly post
Because
it.
there may be people who want to reference it.
You bet. Yeah, so basically, Carmen, the navigators have been working for a couple of years. They made connections, built relationships with a lot of entities. Specifically, they've connected with over 900 city residents. They've built partnerships with our Leopold Community School in the North Fishhatchee Road neighborhood, City of Madison staff they've built partnerships with, and then just various other neighborhood program and service providers. I also do want to point out they work closely with 3 city departments, including police, parks, and the senior center. So with that, I do want to show you, Carmen didn't have her presentation ready for tonight. I asked her to prepare a 50-minute presentation, and she didn't follow through, so I'm kidding. What we talked about is we actually made a video for that planning conference I mentioned, kind of talking about what Carmen does on a daily basis. So we thought it'd be a good idea to show that to you again, just to give you a sense of what Carmen does. And we did make this during the height of COVID, so we are masked, but I think it's hopefully you're able to understand what we're talking about. So.
Good morning, Carmen. Thanks for
Morning, Wayne.
joining us. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us?
Maybe I'll stop there.
Good morning, Carmen.
How's the audio? Okay.
Good morning, Carmen. Thanks for
Morning, Wayne.
joining us. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you and what brought you to Fitchburg?
I'm Carmen Torres Knark, and I've been in Fitchburg for almost 2.5 years now, from a transplant from Seattle, Washington. And I love it here. I never thought that I would be living over here, but I really, really like this state.
Great. So why did you apply for the Neighborhood Navigator job?
Well, when I first moved here to Fitchburg, I didn't know anybody, and I wanted to learn about the neighborhood that I was living in, so I volunteered for our local senior center, and the director there told me about this position, and she thought that I would be good for it and it would interest me a lot. So I thought so too, so I applied for it, and here I am.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the work you do as a navigator.
So as a navigator, we are out to inform people of a certain part of our city about different resources in the city, what's available to them. In Fitchburg, in the location that we're working in, it's predominantly Hispanic. So we try to inform those people of resources that they can use that they would normally not know have any information about.
Great. ¿Hablas español?
Sí, hablo español.
Okay, great. And you're of Peruvian descent, is
Yes,
that correct?
I am.
So burning question, pisco sour, better in Chile or Peru?
Peru.
Okay. So what do you like most about your job?
I like that I'm getting to know people out in the community. I like that I am working with all sorts of people in the community. Just getting to know how people are and what their needs are and what's most important to them.
Do you feel like you're making a difference in your neighborhood?
I think so. There's been a couple instances where I've been at a store and somebody that has seen me in a different location passing out information has come up to me to ask me if I have any information regarding whatever their need is. And so that makes me feel like we're getting the word out and helping people.
So do you have any advice for other cities that might want to start a neighborhood navigator program?
I would say, first and foremost, find out about all your local resources. And then, depending on the community that you're working with, really try and stress to look for what the people need the most. And just put yourself out there.
Any last thoughts?
No, I'm excited about this position. I love this position, and I hope this continues for a long time, and we grow and reach, hopefully other parts of the state will follow behind us, and hopefully we can get this to a normal position everywhere.
Yeah, and as a city, we're certainly grateful to have you and want to keep you here as long as you want to be here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. So that hopefully kind of gave you a big picture overview of what the Navigator program is about. Now I'd like to actually turn to a specific activity that the Navigators have been involved with, as well as our intern said, and that is programming, summer programming at Leopold Park in Madison. So that's programming basically in partnership with City of Madison and a lot of other entities. I believe is it 8 weeks?
Yep.
So
It'll be throughout it'll be out throughout the end of August.
So yeah, started a couple weeks ago and will run up until school. So I want to show you a quick video on that activity as well.
Today we came out with the Leopold Neighborhood Resource Team, which is a group of City of Madison, City of Fitchburg, as well as other stakeholders coming together to make sure that we can provide some events and some programming out here in the Leopold neighborhood.
The idea here is to have a space for connecting for everyone, for the neighbors to come and have a good time. There's always food available, so we serve dinner, and there's always different games to play. MSDR is here every once in a while. We have music. Today, for example, we're going to have spoken word from a student from East High School, so I'm very excited about that.
We'll be doing different things. Like last week, we saw a movie. This week, at about 6 p.m., we're getting ready to have some flag football, for the youth to come out here and just have a, nice time. It's warm. It's a nice day. We just have a lot of cool events and cool programming for the kids and just for the community in general.
So the main goal here is actually to share some awareness about all the programs that happen and all the resources that are available for the community. Many times, especially after the lockdown and all that, has been difficult to reach out to the community with all the tremendous amount of resources that are out there, offered by several nonprofit organizations and also from the government as well. So we just want to have that opportunity for people to come here, learn about all the resources that are available, at the same time have a good time and have dinner and get your bike fixed as well.
It's like last week, it was so nice. We had about 200 people, sitting on the benches, socially distanced. But we all came out to watch Raya and the Last Dragon. There were people of all ages. They came out to eat. They came out to have fun, dance, play games, and it was really fun to see people coming together in one space again, which again we haven't seen for a really long time.
The Leopold and Arbor Hills neighborhood, also what is called the North Fish Hatchery neighborhood, is a very, very diverse neighborhood. It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the whole city. And it's host for the Aldo Leopold Elementary School, which is the biggest elementary school in the whole district. So we're talking about a lot of families here and a lot of kids. So families with kids, and the idea is to offer some support to all those families. So this is a very important area in town, and we want to honor that. We want to honor all the people living here, and that's why it's so important to be right here at Aldo Leopold and having some fun.
When we were kind of touring the neighborhood, we definitely saw kids who were just sitting there bored and looking for something to do. So we figured, why not bring programming here every Tuesday to make sure that the whole family can have things to do and we're not bored and stuck in the house. So it's actually free. It's a free family event. Bring everybody out. You have to bring no money, just bring yourselves.
Really, this is a big opportunity for everyone to get to know each other, to get out of home and a little bit of what the whole lockdown had in our minds, a space for reconnect safely and also learn from all the resources that are available for everyone. I said that a couple of times, but I think it's pretty important that we share that information because, internet is not always the best way to go. Sometimes we need to do that extra effort, and that's why we're here in person offering that option too.
So we'll have through the month of August. Come around about 4 o'clock, and then once 5 p.m. comes, make sure you bring your family and have some dinner, and then we'll get to all the other fun stuff that we have planned.
Así que los invitamos a todos para que puedan venir a participar de Levanta Leopold, el evento que va a estar aquí desde el día julio 20, que es hoy, hasta el 24 de agosto. Muchas de las personas acá son bilingües, así que todas las personas invitadas a participar, va a haber comida, juegos y mucha diversión, así que nos vemos.
Thanks, Ed. So yeah, moving on, we'll talk now about programs, more specifically the city's grant program. And really the grant program is about, again, supporting our neighborhoods through partnerships. And what you see on the screen in front of you is just kind of a snapshot of various partners that we've partnerships we developed over the past 4 or 5 years. And really the program funding priorities are driven by neighborhood needs and issues. I do want to point out that in the past 4 years, basically 2018 to 2021, we have seen our average funding demand, basically that means people asking for our grant funds, to an average tune of about $119,000. So a lot of demand out there for limited resources. So I talked earlier about this idea of our grant program being focused on issues and needs in the neighborhood. So last year we did retweak our program categories. So if you look on the left there, those are the 5 grant program categories, again, based on needs and issues. So youth mentoring, youth education, adult education, workforce development, food security, and then neighborhood/community building and engagement. So in 2020, we did get $68,000 in terms of funding awards. So 8 entities that we made awards to. If you look at the list there, you'll probably see a lot of really well-known, reputable organizations that we funded. I do want to point out that in 2020, with those $68,000, we did serve approximately 2,500 neighborhood residents. So, and I do really want to give credit to Badger Prairie Needs Network, number one there. I think food security really came to the forefront during the pandemic, and they went above and beyond to really make sure that, food security needs were met, not just in the city, but in the broader region as well. So moving into 2021, we did just make awards a couple months ago. The council is involved in the final decision-making process. So we got $63,000 in 2021, made 7 awards. Again, I think you'll probably recognize some of those awardees. I do want to talk more about number 6 and 7. It's probably hard to read, but number 6 is Little John's, which I think people may be familiar with, and we'll talk more about that. And then number 7 is 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. So we'll actually watch videos on both of those entities. And then I do want to point out that, again, this year we received approximately $173,000 in demand, and we're not able to fully fund any of these groups that you see in front of you. So basically, we just had to make half awards. We couldn't give them the full amount of monies that they asked for. And I think we really wanted to give them full awards because they were all really solid applications. But I guess my point here is if we wanted to fully fund those 7 applications, which were all quality, solid applications, we would have needed about $105,000 in city funds. So with that, I want to hear more about one of our groups that we funded, Little John's. So we'll watch another video here.
Well, Little John's, we believe that food is love and that everyone deserves good food. So the idea behind Little John's was started by Chef Dave Heidi, which we all know and love from Liliana's and Charlie's on Main. And he really looked at the problem of getting food to more people as a problem that could be solved through innovation. And really what he did is he took the business model of being a restaurateur and applied social enterprise principles to it. So really Little John's is more of a social enterprise than it is like a nonprofit that's continually looking for charitable dollars. We actually will be 100% revenue self-sustaining once we get up and running the operation, hopefully here in the next year. Yeah, the grant process for the City of Fitchburg Healthy Neighborhoods was awesome. I mean, it was very straightforward, which as a grant writer, I really appreciate not being put through too many hoops. We did ask for $15,000, but we were awarded $7,500, which was still very amazing. We're going to be able to make a huge impact. We actually wrote the grant with a partner agency called Madison Area Food Pantry Gardens. They too are really taking a different approach to food insecurity. Just real briefly about them is they grow produce and then they give it to the food pantries. And they've been doing that for years and in bulk. So what Little John's is going to be is the light processor and packager for all that fresh produce. So we'll be able to do that very efficiently and very neatly with all those consumer-facing kind of packaging once we get this facility up and running. People already recognize this. This is an old Thomasville furniture store, and then it was an A1 very briefly. So it's a 25,000 square foot facility. It has about 13,000 square feet in warehouse. About 7,000 of that will be cooler and freezer space for Little John's. Another good portion will be cave temperature to store like the potatoes and the apples and things that don't need direct refrigeration. Then the front of the building will have a commissary kitchen, which is really the heart and soul of what Little John's is all about. It's that large scale equipment can do it so much more efficiently. In so many of our kitchens throughout Madison, they're really, really nice commercial kitchens. But like the story we like to tell is to give people a context why the commissary kitchen is different. If we were going to make 200 portions of mac and cheese on a commercial range, which we had been doing at Liliana's, it's a 6-burner range. You can have 3 60-quart stock pots sitting on that stove. It takes an hour for the noodles to boil and another half hour for the noodles to cook. And you have to do that 3 times in order to get 200 portions. And 200 portions is really nothing when you think about feeding people in mass. So the commissary equipment, the same amount of 200 portions can be done in 30 minutes with a steam jacketed kettle. So that's what we talk about with labor savings. And then with rescuing the grocery excess, the food costs are extremely limited. So when you take those 2 things, the efficiencies in labor and the fact that we're using beautiful grocery excess, that's how we're able to do what we're able to do. I think we've been, as a community, doing really great at feeding people, and I think this is an opportunity for the community to really invest in innovation and a different way of thinking. This is not going to replace the need for food pantries or soup kitchens, but this will expand the reach to so many more people that either don't know about food pantries and soup kitchens or have barriers to getting there, and the barriers could be stigma, they could be transportation, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, this is going to be an on-par restaurant and dining experience that we all can enjoy in the community, not just for those who are nutritionally insecure.
All right,
Well, Little John's,
now we'll hear from 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin.
So 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin is a land use planning organization started in the mid-90s to help write the state comprehensive planning law. But in the last 10, 15 years, we've been involved a lot more in community work, especially in the city of Madison, some in the city of Milwaukee as well. And our executive director, Deb Nemeth, got involved at Leopold through some city workers in Madison and in Fitchburg, and then just some folks from the school. We've been working at Leopold on stormwater-related projects and garden-related projects for about 5 years now. We started the Green Schoolyard Project, or Green Schoolyard Committee here at Leopold, and we're turning over the coordination of that project to Elizabeth here, and we're really excited about that, to hand it over to the parents. But we've done a lot of community work, and we think that the relationship between community and nonprofits really important. We're really proud to be a part of that partnership.
We do have more work to be done. The Fitchburg grant was critical in creating an infrastructure that really allowed us to be able to focus more on production and less on weeding. And when you are in a food scarce neighborhood such as the Leopold Arbor Hill neighborhood, it's so important to be able to just produce as much as we can in such a short season that Wisconsin really does have. We'd like to think that we're a farm state, and we are in many ways, but when it comes to produce that people eat every day, the season is short. And you can see behind us, the infrastructure has been huge in allowing us to really go to town and creating as many plants as we possibly could and getting them to produce.
All the money from Fitchburg went towards the cedar wood, the cedar raised beds. So it's great to have the cedar wood.
All the beds are ADA height requirement, which is partly why these were a little bit more expensive than just a traditional 2-level bed. We felt it was really important that we built a garden that would work towards more inclusivity for the whole community. So making these beds this height allows anybody to kind of come through and be able to access the garden. You'll also notice the distance between is 4 feet, which also meets that requirement. So someone who needs to have equipment while they move will be able to get through each of the beds as they, so it's a lot more accessible. And that was something that was at the core of what we wanted to accomplish.
We bought compost from Purple Cow Organics with the Fitchburg grant money as well, which is really important. Like, we don't really have to do any weeding in the beds themselves because we have the really great quality compost. So that was another huge piece of, not only having like really strong, healthy plants that are producing a lot, but also to keep down on the time for weeding. That's a big, can be a time suck sometimes.
Especially volunteers.
Yeah.
Last week we harvested 47 pounds of cucumbers and kale and mustard greens. And so when you think about that, like mustard greens and kale, collard greens, that's a lot of weight. And right after we finished harvesting, Tanya and I went over to the Leopold Park where they do an outreach community event every Tuesday, and we gave out the produce for free there. We did get several people that signed up that want to get involved in the community, in our committee, and specifically helping in ways on the garden itself too. So we're super excited about that. We've definitely seen a lot more interest from the community of getting involved ever since we were able to show the community what a little bit can do to go a long way. There's definitely been a sense of empowerment and pride as people walk down the sidewalk now and they pass this garden. I've gotten so many smiles and, oh, it looks amazing, or what are you guys doing? And there's been just so much more engagement with the community. We really want to create this space as an empowerment place for them where they can thrive and really feel like they have an impact on their own environment. And so this infrastructure that the Fitchburg grant gave us is getting us one step closer to bringing the kids back into this garden that's functioning and flourishing, and really see how much they can change the world.
And I didn't script that, but I thought that was extremely well said by Elizabeth. I don't know if people picked up on that, but Elizabeth talked about taking this produce to the programming. That was the programming side I was talking about. So again, you just see the overlap and the integration of all these H&I pieces kind of working together. So I think that's a really cool thing.
So 1,000.
So moving,
Where is that garden located?
Aldo Leopold
At the school or in the park or?
at the school.
Yeah,
Yep.
yep.
Yep. So the third piece that we'll talk about tonight is, again, this idea of places. I think there was probably a lot of discussion last night about what I'll talk about now, so I'll keep it brief. But, you know, we do have kind of two big ticket items in our H&I neighborhoods that is currently planned. Our hub project, which again, I think folks are familiar with, but basically North Fishhatchee Road area. Our phase one is our north side of Traceway Drive. So essentially it's this really enhanced park space. So we are currently working with a consultant, a preferred consultant, to iron out final contract details for final design. Once we get those details worked out, that contract will come before this body for final approval. Assuming final approval, we will then work with the neighborhood to re-engage with them, get that final design set up, and then come spring, be ready to break ground on that phase one. And I do want to point out that staff has submitted 4 grant applications in the past 3 or 4 months with the hopes of offsetting city costs. We won't find out the outcomes of those grants for a few months, but certainly staff is doing due diligence to try to get, you know, some external funding to these projects.
What are the name of the 4 grants?
So we're doing the federal earmark program, so it's Senate and House earmarks. State DNR, there's about 3 different programs under the DNR umbrella. And then 2 county programs, county CDBG, and then a county park grant program. And then our 5th one will be I believe it's a kind of a private entity. It's called People for Bikes. So that's something we're going to go after, I think, in the next month or so. And, you know, the feedback, again, I don't know what the outcomes will be, but the feedback we've gotten from the grant administrators thus far has been positive. So hopefully we can see something, you know, come back from those.
Federal earmark, is that going, was that applied for through the House or through the Senate?
We actually did both. We actually worked right through Polkan's office for the House and then Baldwin's office for the Senate. It was essentially the same app. They just required, talk about inefficiencies. We had to do 2 different apps for essentially the same project to those 2 different bodies, so, yep. But yeah, so that's kind of hub update. In terms of Teen Center, again, I've been working with basically putting together an RFP to work with a community engagement consultant to essentially determine the center's needs and wants. So we did put out the RFP. I am currently working through those processes, but all things, assuming moving ahead, we will get something in front of this committee or this council in the next couple of months regarding that contract as well. So I just want to really kind of hit this home, and I think, you know, you folks are all aware of this, but as we talk about success in implementing these place concepts, to me, it's really about continued and new partnerships. These are big ticket items. These things cost a lot of money, both to build and operate, and I think for these things to be successful, we need to continue to seek out partnerships. And I think we've done that thus far, and I think we will continue to do that. One example I want to point out, if you can see on the images there, Monona did a real nice job in a new development in a kind of an urban neighborhood. They developed a little park space with an ice rink, kind of similar to some of our hub ideas. And if you see up in the top corner there, they've gotten Monona State Bank to kind of sponsor their ice rink. So I think again, this is the idea of whether it's philanthropy, whether it's you know, other governmental sources, whether it's you know, whatever it might be, I think we really need to seek out those external sources to support these kinds of projects. And the last thing I want to talk about is kind of more of a philosophical element related to this places concept, but I think it's very important, specifically as we start to implement our new comprehensive plan, our updated comprehensive plan. And I want to talk about this idea of refill. And essentially when I say refill, I'm meaning redevelopment and infill. So those are basically concepts where we take existing neighborhoods and we create new land uses. So one of our interns, Mitch Boothold, back in 2019, came up with a very cool mapping exercise. Essentially, it's a GIS, which is mapping, a GIS mapping model to basically assist the city in evaluating quote-unquote optimal locations and funding priorities for various potential refill projects. So the idea is, as we continue to talk about the place idea in our neighborhoods, specifically our H&I neighborhoods, there will be redevelopment. So the idea is what lands are most suited for redevelopment and what types of redevelopment. So there's a lot that went into this map, and I'm not gonna be able to explain it all to you tonight, but the idea is some of the darker colors you see on the map, those are areas that are more suited towards redevelopment and infill. So again, as we move forward with development in the H&I neighborhoods, I would really encourage the city to think about objective and strategic ways to plan and develop. You know, I think one of the goals of the initiative is not to be here 50 years from now talking about the same neighborhoods with the same problems, or new neighborhoods with the same problems. So the idea is, how do we learn from past mistakes? How do we learn from past planning practices and really think about planning in a new and better way?
Hey, wait, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm really into the refill and infill and everything, and redeveloping those neighborhoods to improve housing. Does this include just really coming down on some landlords who may not be appropriately running their buildings?
I mean, I think that's more of regulation and management of existing. You know, I think I'm talking more about new development. Mm-hmm. But certainly, I mean, you bring up a good point. I think as we develop multifamily housing, a key component of that is management, and how do we ensure that, you know, the management is sufficient and meets our needs. But certainly, yeah, as we, you know, I guess one example of this would be, you know, thinking about, trouble spots or hot spots within the neighborhoods. And you bring up a good point. I mean, we used a mapping model to do one exercise. We can create models for a lot of different things to do, you know, a lot of different outcomes. So, so this is really more about, I would say, new land use. Okay. But certainly we can, to your point, I think we could get at those issues.
Yeah, something I was thinking about, you know, you build the new properties and you get people who are living in the older properties into those newer properties, and then redo, you know, what we can, the property. So it's kind of like we're building up. Yeah, and I think you're seeing that in Fish Hatch. You know, you're seeing market rate development, but you're also seeing quote unquote workforce housing, where, you know, so as we develop new, the people that want to stay in that neighborhood still have options to do so. But we can also bring in new people and just create those diverse neighborhoods that we talk about. Yep. So I kind of, you know, use the phrase optimal land use or optimal locations, and I think that, again, that's kind of a philosophical term, but I do want to give you an example that to me crystallizes this idea of what optimal could mean from a city development perspective. So this is just a very rough analysis, but what I did is I looked at assessed value of two stretches of what I'll call heavily trafficked corridors. So like corridors we see in our H&I neighborhoods, like Fish Hatch or Verona Road. So I used McKee and Seminole Highway. So 800 feet on McKee, basically one side of the street, there was single-family residential. The other side of the street, there was suburban commercial. Same thing with Seminole Highway, one side of the street, single-family residential, other side of the street, suburban commercial. Now, what I want to point out here is this city has a place for single-family residential. We will always have a place for that. What I'm talking about is figuring out where are the most appropriate places for certain types of land uses. So in the first example, again, if we look at land as a city asset in which we can create value and provide services for our residents through tax base, that single-family stretch is assessed at about $3 million. That suburban commercial stretch is assessed at almost $6 million. So twice the value. And obviously twice the assessed value means, generally speaking, twice the tax revenue. Now, I also do want to point out that's suburban commercial. If we develop like we have been developing the past year, meaning what I would call urban commercial, building up, you'll see that number, I can't say what it would look like, but it would be bigger than 6 million. So again, something to think about. Same scenario with Seminole Highway. Single-family residential on one side of the street assessed at 1.7 million. Other side of the street assessed at almost 3 times that. So again, as we think about developing our comprehensive plan, new development in our H&I neighborhoods, I just really want to encourage the city to think, again, strategically about what our optimal land use is in these neighborhoods.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Sure.
Wade? A couple of things. One, when you talk about healthy neighborhoods, though, I think that means you have a mix of housing options, and so you don't just have, I think that's one of the problems with North Fishhatchie Road is there's no ownership.
Yep.
It's all rentals. So, and I think I'd be a little careful about just saying that. And then the other piece to it is the cost side of the ledger, because with more people, there's more cost to provide services there as well. I can dig up an article I read and send it to the council if people want to see it, but it talked about actually when you look at the cost side, the cost to provide, and they looked at it on a per unit basis, which I think is more appropriate than an acre basis actually. They talked about the cost for a rental versus ownership is about the same.
Yep.
However, on a per unit basis, the revenue is actually lower on rentals. And so I think that's one thing to be aware of. And I hate to use money and tax dollars when we're looking at trying to build healthy neighborhoods and what the right mix is as well.
Yeah, point taken. I guess I'm talking more about just optimal use of heavily traffic corridors. From a planning perspective, when I see residential single-family homes backing up on our most prime real estate, and I'm not just talking Fitchburg, I'm talking the region. I live off of East Wash and Madison. You know, you just see these areas that, 50,000 cars a day isn't the best place to put a single-family home. So really, point taken, we can debate single-family, multifamily, but I'm really talking about, like, even if we just did 4-story commercial, where that single-family residential is, I think you're talking about addressing your concerns and also just creating what I would say better value for the city in terms of land use. But, so yeah, yep.
I think, I think the area valuation gets you more of what you're looking for, though. So, for example, the building I live in has 54 units in it. And the spot that building takes up with the parking lot would be roughly maybe 6 single-family homes. And even if we use the $350,000, you're looking at about $2 million in valuation. The building that I live in right now is valued at about $4.5 million, and it's housing 54 families instead of 6. So, and the thing is, if you were to spread out, if you were to do that all in single family, if you were to have 54 single family homes, the amount of area that it takes up, we did a big analysis of this when we were looking at the Fitchburg, Oregon Business Park some time ago. The more it gets spread out, the harder it is to provide services. So now you have to deal with, if you're going to end up taking up, a huge amount of acreage to have those 50 families, yeah, it means that there's more roads you have to build. They get farther away from things like fire stations and grocery stores and all of this stuff. So the density is beneficial in a lot of ways, but it has to be done the right way. To me, as someone who lived in the Leopold neighborhood for almost 10 years, one of the problems I see up there is it's all apartments. It's not even necessarily that it's rental versus ownership. Is that it's all apartments. There's nothing else there. There's not a grocery store. There's not. You got a convenience store. But, there's nothing else there. There's no other destinations. There's nothing else for people. So the whole idea behind the SMART code was that we would start mixing up these uses. And by mixed uses, I'm not talking about apartments and houses. I'm talking about apartments, condos, maybe some houses, maybe some residential retail. And one of the things that I've been disappointed with as we've moved forward with the development plans is that the very building that I live in was, when it was originally planned, when the Nine Springs neighborhood plan was approved, my building was supposed to have about 10,000 square feet of retail space in it for things like a barber shop or an ice cream parlor or something like that. And, now it's going to get the Quick Trip nearby, which will be fine. But when we make these plans, we do it for a reason, and we need to, in order to incorporate this and have stuff going on in the neighborhoods, you know, you need more things. You have to have these amenities in order to make the neighborhoods work. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're lacking in most of our residential neighborhoods in Fitchburg. My favorite residential neighborhood is Hatchery Hill, because you got all kinds of stuff there. There's all kinds of things going on within walking distance of where you live. But you go almost anywhere else in Fitchburg, and that's really hard to find. I mean, you can go to Jamestown and find a liquor store, but, you know, that's not really meeting the needs of that community. So I think those are other things we need to keep in mind as we go forward with future development plans.
Yep, good point. And I just want to reiterate, again, this slide isn't anti any specific kind of development. What it's really talking about is, you know, we're a city that can accommodate all sorts of kinds of development, but where is that development best suited? And that's I think, really the take home with this slide.
Jay, that is disappointing that little strip mall only has a liquor store, but I'd also add, we cross one road and there's three different grocery stores. There's a plethora of things within walking distance. So, you know, I'm taken aback a little. We have a nice neighborhood. There's some problems, but, you know, that this is a horrible at risk. You know, some of you probably even, you know, think of it as slum. Those are nice apartments. There's mostly good people, and, you know, you need to do a few things, but it is not, you know, falling off the cliff. We have many things going for us in the Jamestown neighborhood. It is not a food desert. I'll just add that.
Well, I think my point on that is it's not, I didn't use any of those words you just used. And about 15 years ago, there was a rather significant investment in the fountains. What was the fountains?
Yep.
Now it's the new fountains to really improve conditions there. And it's a lot better there than it used to be.
Huge.
But the road you're talking about crossing is not a road that I ever expect any pedestrians in Fitchburg to try to cross.
There's a light to cross it.
I know,
People
but
do. There's people cross all the time.
That's a dangerous area to try to cross.
You know, I take offense that our residents can't cross streets, you know, that somehow.
Well, I mean, okay.
That, you know,
That's not my point. My point is it's a dangerous road to try to cross, no matter who the residents are.
I'll let it go, Jay. Yeah, understood.
And I just got two more slides. Just wrapping up, I want to talk about what I'll call future directions, and more specifically, the H&I wish list. And I want to be very clear, this is a wish list. I understand the realities of city budgets. I've worked in government for 15-plus years, but I really want you know, I kind of feel it's my responsibility to let the council know what I see as issues moving forward with maintaining and enhancing the H&I. So, short-term wish list, and number one would be to broaden the H&I committee, the personnel on the committee, as well as the scope of the committee. You know, we've talked today about people, places, and programs. Right now, the H&I committee is specifically focused on the grant program. I think there's interest citywide in expanding that committee to address all things H&I. So that's, I guess, number one. Number two, I did mention it. I think hopefully the videos today showed you the value of what these guys do. I can't get them very many hours, and we can't pay them very much. And I think if there's a way to get more funds to them, that would be a wish list item as well. Third piece, additional funds for the grant program. You know, obviously, we're again talking about Town of Madison, Celta neighborhood coming to the city in the next year plus. That will be a fourth H&I neighborhood, meaning if the grant program pot stays the same, we're spreading the same amount of money to more neighborhoods. Long term, I just have one, and it's a big one. So I don't know, folks, I know folks have lived in Madison or worked for Madison or lived in the region for a while, and when cities reach a certain size or they have certain issues, they develop certain departments to address those issues. One would be community development, and that's a broad term, but I think hopefully with what we talked about today, you get a better understanding of what that means. So Madison has a CD department. Other cities with issues like we have a CD department with specific staff devoted to H&I issues. So I see long-term potential formation of a department like that within this city to address those issues, to include, you know, obviously some new staff. So that would be kind of a long-term wish list item as well. So with that, I am done. I just do want to point out, I want to thank Fact TV. All those videos you saw, that was their doing. So Scott and Jeremy and Chad, thank you for all that work. But yeah, we can certainly take any questions or comments the group might have.
I guess my question is for Carmen. As a neighborhood navigator, do you work closely with the police to kind of like if there's tensions in the neighborhood, to be that person who can kind of settle things down?
You know, at one point, we were going to get together with the police, and then the pandemic hit. So that was kind of put on hold for a little while, but I'm hoping to.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of successful. I'm a former cop from Madison, and that was really kind of a good thing to have people that the police can reach out to.
Yeah.
In one point there, Jim, you know, Carmen isn't trained in this. She's not educated in this. She's just an interested resident that wants to do better for her neighborhood. So, so where we can, we try to provide training, but I just do want to point out, you know, a lot of folks that are doing work like Carmen have masters in social work and are paid accordingly. You know what I mean? So, so for what we're offering her and what she brings to the city, you know, she's been a great asset.
Right, and I'm just saying in the natural course of duties, when people see others in the neighborhood that they can trust.
Exactly.
You know, when things happen, you know, sometimes those are the best people to go to.
And even at that point, I think Carmen in her work, you know, she's found those neighborhood leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if Carmen isn't the person to go to, she can direct that person to the other person to go to that isn't a city employee.
Right.
So yeah, it's just kind of that networking and spider webbing, and yeah, I think it's been effective. So, yeah.
And I was going to actually add to that, a former program that I worked with, that worked with police, you know, Carmen, the neighborhood navigators, for the time being, they were able to, you know, support, you know, and we had dialogue and conversation about that. So I think as the neighborhood navigators serve as like a face of the community, to answer your question, I would say that it would, I think that, yeah, a face of the community would probably be the best term. Yeah.
Very good. Any additional questions? Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, so I will make a comment, and I want to say thank you, Wade, because you put a lot of hours working on the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative program. You know, every year you try to improve. You know, we work every year to bring new ideas, improve the process. It's a working program, initiative, pilot, that we call it. And thank you for all the grants that you submitted for the hub. It's incredible. I read them, and you know, and thank you very much. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. I think you were in our last meeting, and it was great to have you and your participation in the team. So I think I want to tell you to the council that, you know, we are, because I have one of the my neighbor's comments was, so, you know, what is the impact that you guys try to do with the city, with the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative? Because you're giving like $5,000, $7,000 grant. What is, you know? And I say, you know, yes, it's a pilot. It's the first phase. It's a new initiative. And maybe we are not seeing the result in the short term right now in a year, but at least we are planting the seed for something bigger, better. And the other thing I would say is the city acknowledged that we have some issues in some neighborhood, and we are trying to do something. And this is great. We are trying to do something. We are not looking the other way, and we are trying to do something. So I want to thank you, Wade, and your team, because I know that you put a lot of hours behind the scene. So thank you.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, just to kind of link some of the thoughts that Jim brought up earlier and some of the things that were mentioned. When most communities in Wisconsin, as they get larger, change their departmental structures. And Fitchburg had a unique problem because when it incorporated, it had to just suddenly sprout all of these things that never existed before within the municipal boundaries. So we had a planning department, and then state statute requires that a class 4 city, which is what we are, have a building inspector. So we had to hire one of those. And building inspection was one person at the time, and it kind of just became its own department. And then later in the 90s, we decided we needed an economic development department. And so now we have that as a standalone department. In most larger communities in Wisconsin, it's not done that way. Planning, zoning, community development, economic development, and building inspection are generally part of the same department, and their efforts to do different things in the communities are integrated. This isn't really a discussion for tonight, but at some point in the future, we might want to think about how this is done, because it seems like, even just physically within this building, the Community and Economic Development Department is about as far away from the Planning Department physically as they can be. And I think there's some room to have some efficiencies in our staffing and in our functionality by trying to bring all of these things closer together and working more closely as an integrated unit.
I guess I would say from my experience, they meet regularly and they meet often and communicate often. I think it might, be a benefit for them to be closer together in the building, but I know that, Mike does a fantastic job of meeting with Sonia and actually Public Works as well and other people throughout the city. So I think he does a great job and our staff does a great job of that coordination. I see it all the time. So it might be beneficial for them to be on the same floor of the building, but they do a great job of that from what I've seen.
All right, hearing no other additional questions, we are approaching the hour. I too want to thank Wade for your presentation, the work that you do, and thank you very much.
Yep.
Armin, thank you, and Sid.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Very, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for your service.
Have a good evening. Very good. Thank you again. And our next presentation under our agenda items is on municipal budgeting and budget priorities. Director Misty Dodge will present. We'll give her a few seconds just to.
It's a lot of mics.
A few seconds to set up.
Oh, man. Okay.
All set?
Yeah. I was hoping I could have my notes on there, but we'll have to go to the old-fashioned paper version. We'll get it done. Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for letting me speak to you again tonight. I know we had a long night last night getting the CIP adopted. It's good that we have kind of that phase done. Now we need to kick off the next part, which is the budget process. So we talked a lot about during CIP time that CIP is a plan, but then the actual appropriation or the dedicating of the money happens during the budget time. And that's the phase that we are starting now. So tonight I'm going to talk briefly about some more terminology and theory. You'll see that there's a lot of slides that are the same as what we talked about back in May. I'm not going to talk about them as thoroughly, but I thought it'd be helpful for them to all be in the same place. So that's why there's some of those slides I'll move through really quickly. We'll talk more about the optional expenditure restraint program, the state imposed levy limits, I know we talked about those in May as well, but now it's really going to become an important thing as we do the budget. CIP as a plan, we didn't necessarily have to live by those rules. We had to know that they existed, but we didn't have to make sure we complied. When it comes to the budget, we are going to have to make sure that we comply with levy limits. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then there's some upcoming financial concerns. I just want to kind of lay some groundwork with you guys. Obviously, we're not going to go into all of the details at this point. That will come out when the budget comes out and when the department heads do their presentation. But there's a couple of big ticket items that I at least wanted to get you guys aware of. We're going to talk a little bit about structural deficits and why I don't like them and why you shouldn't either, with an asterisk this year. I know you know what that asterisk is. Then we'll talk about the process. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for kind of an open forum. If the council wants to share with the mayor kind of what your thoughts and priorities are, if there's things you think that we're doing that we shouldn't do, that stuff, stuff that you'd like him to consider while he's putting together his proposed budget. Because at this point, we are in the very early stages of it. So this is kicking it off with you guys at a council level. And then just this last Monday was when worksheets were due from departments. So we're still in the very infant stages of the actual budget process. So most of this terminology I will skip, but the one that I want to make sure that we are all talking about the same is that property tax levy. So that is the total amount of property taxes that we need to collect from all of the property owners. So how we calculate that is through the budget process. We say this is the level of service we want to provide. What's the cost of that? We subtract out our other revenues, whether it's money from the feds or the state or the county or from fees, that type of thing. And whatever that gap is, whatever the difference is, that's what we have to put on the property tax bills and collect from our property owners. So that's the property tax levy. So have a lot of these same slides from last time, just so they're all in the same place. Here I'm going to stop. So looking at all of the levy funds, where we spend most of our money. So levy funds, if I can back up, is the general fund. So that's the main operating fund of the city. It's the capital projects fund, which is the CIP, essentially, that we adopted last night. It's the debt service fund, which is our repayment of the money that we borrowed. And then it's the library and Fact TV. So it's those 5 funds that make up the levy funds. And when you look at those 5, the biggest place where we spend our money is on public safety at 43%. Next highest would be debt service at 14%. And then general government, which would include finance and HR and administration and clerks and all of the general stuff, is at 11%. And you'll note on each one of these slides that I did include the source. So I'm mostly pulling documents or pulling pages out of the budget, our annual report, that type of thing. So if you want to see more context around the same concept, you can go out to that link and get the full document.
Go ahead, yes.
So where is save this one?
So the presentation that I'm doing now, so it is on the agenda folder that you have for Committee of the Whole. If you go to the July folder, it'll be in there. Otherwise, I will email it out to the council after tonight.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Then if we're looking at just the general fund, so that's the main operating fund of the city, and kind of how we spend our money, not what function, but kind of what the purpose is, the bulk of the money is spent on personnel. So 71% of the general fund budget is spent on personnel. This is expected. At our heart, a city is a service provider, so it's expected that personnel would be our biggest component. The reason why I want to bring it up for budget, though, is that generally your staffing levels stay at least the same, if not go up. So what that also means, as we're putting together the budget, is the majority of our budget is more or less locked in, unless you're going to make changes to a staffing level or something like that. And then here in Wisconsin, this is looking at general fund revenues. We are mostly funded through property taxes. We're at 74%. We do get a little bit of money from the intergovernmental aid, so that would be federal, state, and county. That's at 12%. And then we have just a couple of percentages from other places. So here in Wisconsin, property taxes is by far the way that we rely on our funding for the most part. So the purpose of the annual budget, I still think this is one of the most important things that you do, because this is what sets the priorities, it sets the goals for the community, and it creates that balance between what level of service you want to provide and how much that's going to cost that you will then pass on to the property owners and the renters. So we will use this document to determine that level of service and the cost, and then also how to fund it. Again, most of it being property taxes. I know last night a wheel tax was brought up. Obviously, that would be a decision we could make. I don't know that you're interested in having that conversation, but it is a conversation you could have during the budget process, or other types of fees. So then we will also, through the budget, set what that property tax levy is. So going back to the beginning, so the levy is the total amount that I need to collect from all of the owners in order to fund our budget. And then we allocate that amount to everybody based on their values and put it on their bills. So one of the big points of confusion I get a lot, especially during tax time, is that even though the city collects all of the property tax bills through January 31st, it's actually more than just the city that's on that property tax bill. And we are at about 36%, so just over a third actually goes to the city to fund city operations. The bulk of the property tax bill actually goes to the schools, whether that's the Verona, Madison, or Oregon schools. And then there's a piece for Madison College, and then also a piece for the county. This chart I know we looked at before, but just wanted to point out again, so this bottom blue part is the city's levy. So it's the total amount that we collected for city purposes through our budget. You can see it's increasing throughout time, which is what you would expect. The more pronounced thing, though, is this purple section. This would be the school districts, how much we're collecting from all the school districts. And you can see if you just compare 2020 to 2011, there's a very significant difference there. And that is also not surprising. Every single one of the school districts has passed a referendum in the last few years. So that's why that continues to increase.
Can I ask a question before? Okay, thank you. The referendum that we approved in November 2022, so when it's going to affect the tax bill? When it's affecting the school budget? Is in the 2020?
For the Madison School District?
Madison, do you know that?
So I'm not sure how the timing on those works.
Okay.
The one thing I can say is if you look at your property tax bill, it's actually very helpful in the bottom kind of left corner. It shows you what the non-recurring referendums are that was approved for your school district. And then it also tells how much of your specific bill goes to pay for that referendum. So it's really helpful. So I live in the Verona School District, so I can see how much of my bill went to pay for the high school, right? It doesn't include the ongoing referendums. So Verona, as an example, also approved an ongoing one for the staffing. That's not on there, but anything that's going to fall off the bill at some point, kind of a shorter term one, that's listed specifically, and it also tells you when that's going to fall off. So it's a pretty nice piece of information, but it's little numbers way in the bottom corner.
Yeah, I didn't pay attention, or I didn't see, or it hasn't hit yet to the Madison.
There is at least something on Madison. All of our bills have something in that corner.
Misty, I have a question. Please excuse my ignorance. So I understand the levy, okay? What is the timing with the assessments? Because, I'm concerned, like the school district, well, we need this much money, and then they set based on a mill rate on the current assessment, then we bump up the assessment. I think they're collecting more money than they asked to, and tell me I'm drinking cyanide Kool-Aid here.
We actually have some slides on that in a little bit, if you don't mind holding until we get, when you
All
see
right.
the chocolate cake, know that that's you.
Okay.
And actually, we're there now. So some more terminology stuff. So assessed value is the value that Dave was just talking about. So the city assessor goes property by property, makes sure that they know how many bedrooms are there, what the size is, and they're very detailed record cards to know and to calculate what that value should be. So every property has an assessed value either by the city assessor or the state manufacturing assessment division. There's also an equalized value. This amount is set by the state and is for the city overall. So it doesn't look at property by property. It just says, as a total, the city of Fitchburg is worth this much money. The ratio between those then is what the assessment ratio is. So usually in the past, the city had been a reval assessment model where we would revalue every property every year based on, current market statistics. So we were always right around 100%. This year, so the values as of 1/1/21, the city assessor is doing a maintenance year instead, which means that for the most part, everybody's values are going to stay the same as last year. There are exceptions. If you build a new house or you add something to it or they find an error, that type of a thing, there'll be some exceptions. But for the most part, people's values should stay the same this coming tax bill versus last tax bill, just on the assessed value.
One question, the equalized value, if it's city as a whole by the State Department of Revenue, their information, is it coming from our city assessor then?
Yep, so the city assessor has to certify the sales that we see to the state, and then they have a magic that makes it all work to figure out what the total value is across the city.
Dave, go ahead.
Just so that fits together, you say, why do they do that? The state funds 2/3 of public education. So they, they want to make sure that people are paying the 1/3, they want to, and so that's how it fits in. Otherwise, you could lower your assessment and try to get the state to pay more. I think that's factors in, am I correct?
Yeah, another way to think of that is, so the school taxes that are on everybody's tax bill is allocated across all the municipalities based on equalized value. So back to Verona School District, so the Fitchburg share is based on Fitchburg's equalized value versus Verona's equalized value. Let's say we were always at 100%, we revalue every year, and Verona, I don't know if they are or not, but let's pretend that they were one that just kept the assessments the same all the time and only did a reval every 10 years. Then that would shift that school calculation that you're talking about, and you wouldn't have comparable information for us versus Verona. So that is a big part of why they do that, and it's a way for us to equalize the values between the communities regardless of their assessment style.
Jake?
Aren't we required by statute to stay within a certain amount of the equalized value, though? I thought it was like 93%.
You have to be within 10% every 5 years. And if you're not, then the state can come in and do it and charge you for it.
Well, I mean, there's fees for everything, so, right. So, and I don't know if you know what our current assessment process is. Well, I'm sure you do, but at one time, we were doing physical inspections of every property in Fitchburg once every 3 years. They were on a rotation. Are we still doing that?
Not exactly. So obviously, these are better questions for the city assessor. So that would be the old model where you would do a full reval once every 5 or 10 years, something like that, and you'd go into every house then. Now I believe what we do is we split the city up into pieces, and we kind of go certain places every year. But Amy Mercer, the city assessor, would be able to answer that much better, which that's their website. So I included that on there. There's a lot of great information with frequently asked questions and resources about what they do and why they do it the way they do, and how to get information if you think that there's not the value that it should be. So would encourage you to have Amy here. And actually, if I may share, so Randy has invited Amy to talk at a committee of the whole in the future. So we're going to let her get through her assessment process first, but then she'll be here to answer all those questions in a few months. So then, this is your question, Dave. So one of the comments I get a lot is exactly what Dave was saying, is that the reason why the city assessor increased my value was because the city needed more money, and so that's how they get more money. And that is not true. And part of the reason why is I'm going to walk you through how we actually calculate our tax bills. Hopefully that'll make it a little bit clearer. So the first step when we calculate the tax bills is figuring out what all those property tax levies are. And I'm going to use this imperfect analogy of a chocolate cake. And it's not perfect, but it's at least looks really good. So first step would be baking that cake. What that means is all of the municipalities, so us, the schools, the county, Madison College, all of us go through the same or similar budget process, where we look at our costs, what our other revenues are, and at the end, we get that property tax levy. And so I need to accumulate all of those numbers from all those jurisdictions, and that tells my team how much money in total we need to collect from everybody for property taxes. The next step then is we determine the TID increment, which I like to call the frosting. So one of the other misconceptions is that TID properties don't pay taxes, and that's not true either. So they actually pay the same rate as everybody else. It's just that those property taxes get diverted into the TID fund, which is kind of a separate fund that we use to pay for the project costs, rather than going to us and the school, et cetera. So I call that the frosting. So really the first step in all of it is figuring out how much money I need to collect in total. And that's the first piece of it. After that, then we determine how to allocate it to the property owners, or cutting the different pieces, and that's where the values come into place. So the big piece of it is figuring out how much we need to collect in total. That's where budgets are so important. And then those values really just determine how much of that piece of cake you get versus somebody else. So a $10 million building, for example, has a much bigger piece than the $300,000 average home. And so by increasing the values doesn't actually change how much total I need to collect. It just changes how much you pay versus somebody else, and how those slices are made.
When I've gotten that question, Dave, a helpful way to think about it is if everybody's taxes, if everybody's assessments in the city went up by 10%, the city wouldn't collect $1 more because the tax rate would have to go down, because the levy is the amount of money we're collecting. And the levy is going to be the same no matter what your specific assessment is, or whatever Aaron's specific assessment is. If someone's assessment goes up, sometimes there's other ones that go down, but it all comes out to the same total amount that we're collecting. And the city can't just, the levy limit is the levy limit no matter what the assessments are. So if we had a year where all the assessments in the city of Fitchburg went up 10%, we're still under the levy limit. We still can't spend any more money than the levy limit. And so our tax rate would have to go down to compensate for the fact that we can't spend that much money.
Understood. Thank you.
Our property owners aren't used to having a maintenance year like what we're doing this year. So it'll be interesting once we start collecting taxes, how many people didn't understand that connection and think that since their assessed value stayed the same, that means their property tax bill is going to stay the same, because that's not true either. You know, all the budgets are going up or are likely to go up. We're going to need a bigger cake. We're going to need to collect more money. If your piece of it stays the same, the cake is still bigger.
Well, I think the bigger problem if we're doing a maintenance year is that in 2 years, when we aren't doing a maintenance year, those valuations are going to go up a lot more than they would if we didn't do that. Now, granted, the property tax bill, the final number at the bottom isn't going to change much, but it's the funny thing that, when someone goes to sell their house, they want it to be as high a value as possible, but when they pay their taxes, they want it to be as low a value as possible.
Absolutely.
And I think this is something that we need to explain continually, because I have had that conversation with multiple people in my district that they're saying the city increased the taxes last year. You increase. I said, no, you need to look at the tax rate mill. You know what I mean? This is what we charge, and you see we have been constant during the last 5 years. We haven't had increases. We have been 2-3 cents or whatever it was, but the value of the property went up, and then suddenly, yes, you're paying more taxes, but it's not, what I mean? So I think that we need to do a better job sometimes educating. I know that you do a good job with every year you do the show and, you explain all of that, but I think it's still, I am receiving those calls, you know what I mean? The city has been increasing the taxes like crazy. You know what I mean? But no, they have that concept of they don't understand how to read the tax bill, you know what I mean?
And with taxes, I think it depends on how you look at it. You know, if you look at the mill rate versus you look at your bill versus
Yeah.
you look at the total overall
Or
levy or
where
the
you
budget
live, in
or.
which school district do you live,
Yep.
makes a difference too, and,
Yep.
you know, so, yeah.
Yeah. And so this last year, I did the same cake analogy as a separate kind of standalone Fact TV spot, which I know is out on the city assessor's website. And if you guys have any suggestions for me on how to explain this in a way that makes more sense to people, I'd love some more feedback. I'm obviously a numbers person, so it's fine for me, but.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, so today I read an article about maybe the housing bubble is going to burst. Okay, so the value of my houses will go down. So people will expect their taxes to go down. But what I'm understanding is because we already spent up to that levy where my house was, we still got to collect the same amount of taxes, correct?
Exactly. So back to Jay's example, that if everybody was up too high 20% and we drop everybody the exact same 20%, all else equal, everybody's tax bill would be the exact same.
So I'm going to have to be really more conservative in how I think about spending this year, correct? Okay.
Very good. So we kind of talked about this a lot already, so I'll move on. I did include these two extra resources. So the first one is from the Department of Revenue. It's a guide for property owners. We actually send this out to people a lot, so it includes information about the assessment process and the appeal process for assessment, as well as property taxes and appeal process for that and how it's calculated. There's a lot of really great information in there too. And then the second one is a video. It's an assessing thing more than it's a finance thing, but it talks about the importance of uniformity and why, when we're talking about what those percentages do as compared to the whole, it's more important that everybody is at that same level rather than it's here versus here, right? So that video does a really nice job of kind of explaining that uniformity concept and why it's important. So if you have a few minutes, I would encourage you to watch that. Budget constraints. So this is the bad news portion of the presentation. So we have the same optional expenditure restraint program that we talked about last time, and then we have the levy limits, which is a requirement. So starting with the optional expenditure restraint program, so we talked about kind of how it was calculated last time. I will get our net new construction number, which is a big component of both of these. I'll get our preliminary number at the end of this week. So I don't know it yet, but I have an idea. We'll see how close I am. But based on my estimates at this point, I think our expenditure restraint limit will be about 4.2%. Knowing the town of Madison is coming on, I think that 4.2% is going to be a lofty lift. So we might have to forgo that this year. I am working with the Department of Revenue to see if there's some ways to interpret the legislation that I might be looking at it differently. They sent me another email this morning that I'm just not quite digesting well, so I don't feel comfortable sharing how it's going to all work with you yet, because I haven't wrapped my arms around it yet. But I am working with the state now to try to figure that piece out.
I think, Misty, I just want to say too on that expenditure restraint, I worked with Misty and Mike, before Chad was in his position to try and get the legislature to give us a waiver on expenditure restraint because we're taking over the town of Madison. Joint Finance has 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and we live in Dane County, so that didn't happen, unfortunately. But, Misty is still seeing if there's some other way around it. It had been done, I think, one other time, and they didn't care to give us a waiver for it.
Right. Which was a little disappointing because it had been done before.
Yeah.
But, yeah. The good news, well, I guess the bad news first is the amount of expenditure restraint that we get lately is about $600,000. So that would be money, if we don't qualify for this program, that's money from the state that we will not get, that we will need to backfill somehow. The good news is we planned for this. We knew the town of Madison was coming. We knew that it was probably going to be unlikely to qualify for expenditure restraint every year during that period of time, knowing these huge changes. So we do have 2 years' worth of expenditure restraint sitting in assigned fund balance in the capital projects fund to fill that hole. So it's still cash that we're not getting, which is the bad news. Good news is we planned for it. And so we'll be okay. We don't have to drastically cut our spending as a result of it because we planned for it.
I think the way the program is structured from the beginning, we always knew that we weren't going to be able to qualify for it every year. Almost no communities in Wisconsin can qualify for it every year, especially if they're having rapid growth like we are.
Yeah, so growth is factored into the formula a
It
little
is,
bit, but it's
not
capped.
at the rate that lives in the real world.
Right, right. Yeah, and you'll see based on our history, so we did miss it a couple years in 7 and 8, but back then it was only a couple $100,000, so it wasn't as problematic. And then we did forego it back in 2016 as well, which was a much higher number at that point. But the council at the time decided the initiatives that they wanted to fund were more important, and they chose to not participate in that program, which again might be something that we have to do this year. But at least we planned for it. That's the good news. So this talks about the policy, so it bought us some time for planning for it. So even if we didn't see this coming, we would at least have a year to plan because of how we have our policy set up, which is very helpful. So that's all for expenditure restraint. Levy limits is the big one. So where expenditure restraint is optional and we can say, we don't want to do that this year, levy limits is not something that we can not follow. That one is a state statute requirement. And besides just being the law, there's also a penalty. And it's a dollar for dollar penalty until the penalty is paid in full. So if we do say, we don't feel like following levy limits, if we go over $1, the state's going to get it back from us. If we go over $1 million, the state's going to get it back from us. So there's, not only is it illegal, it's also no incentive to do it because the state will get it back from us. So I included the form that I have to fill out to demonstrate our net new construction so that you could see it. The biggest driver of it would be our net new construction. And again, I'll get that number at the end of this week, at least as a preliminary number. I think it's going to be about 5.2%, or at least in that ballpark. Big wild card, of course, is still the state manufacturing assessments. Then there are a variety of adjustments that were allowed. The one that we use every year is that red one. That's for the debt service levy. That's helpful. So as we're investing in these new buildings and the new roads and that stuff, at least the levy limit is not a concern for that piece. So we still want to be mindful about how we borrow money, but at least the levy limit piece is taken care of. If we ever come into a really, really tough spot, the counter argument to why levy limits are there is that we could always go to our residents and ask a referendum to see if they would let us go over the levy limits. So my perspective, of course, if you're going to engage me for a bit, I don't think the state should be telling the locals how to spend your money. I think you guys are all elected by the constituents and should know their best interest. But the state feels that they want to provide these extra requirements on it. The opposite side of that, though, they will say is you could always go for referendum and get permission that way.
Chad would like to ask a question. Is he allowed?
Depends on how easy of a question it is.
I'll make the decision. Yes, go ahead.
I appreciate that. Hopefully I'm not blazing any trails here, and I don't intend to make a habit of this.
No, you're fine.
But the question that I have, Misty, is last night at council, we had a development come in that's going to be run by a nonprofit, which obviously, based on my understanding, would not be assessed from a taxing perspective. Does that project, construction project, count towards our net new construction ratio, or, okay, it does not?
It does not.
Okay.
Yep. So that's part of why the payment in lieu of taxes comment was made, and it is something that would be really beneficial for us. But then, yes, it hurts our net new. One of the things that does help our net new, however, is all of the TID activity that we're having. So even though the TID doesn't pay taxes to us to pay for the services we provide to the property in the TID yet, at least their value does contribute to net new construction and is really the biggest driver for our big increases that we've been seeing lately.
Go ahead.
I have a question. Okay, so if is some of those facilities that they are not for profit, they decided to pay the tax city portion.
Mm-hmm.
Can we add that construction to that construction to the calculation or no?
Nope, so that would basically be another revenue source. So when we look at our expenses, we subtract all our other revenues. That payment in lieu of taxes is another revenue that we would subtract before we determine how much we have to allocate to everybody else.
Okay, but the building doesn't count as a new construction either.
Nope, because it's assessed at 0.
One moment. Any further questions from chambers? We do have,
I just want to ask one quick question.
one moment, Gabriella.
This question crossed my mind earlier, and then it escaped twice, but now it's back. So since the building inspection department, or the assessing department, is maintaining status quo, how is that applying to new construction and to partially constructed buildings? Because if a property was just, a $100,000 lot for 2020, in 2021, now there's a house on it, and it's obviously worth a lot more. Is he maintaining that at that level? And then the other follow-up question is, in the past, what assessing used to do is, as a building was built, it would be reassessed as it went along. So if a building took 2 or 3 years to build, or even a house, let's say they got a foundation poured in November, but the rest of the house isn't there, are we assessing for that foundation? Is that being added in, or is that being status quo also until the building's complete?
Both of those are factored in. So the maintenance assessment would just be for properties that are essentially the same as before. So if you added on, if it's new construction, or if on the opposite side, if it was demolished, those are reasons why your assessment may change still, or if there's an error, things like that. So that would still be factored in there. And then the assessing department does do partials. So they are required to look at what the value is as of the first of every year. So to your point, if it was nothing as of the first of 2 years ago, and then it was a foundation, and then it was a house, they have to value it appropriately at each one of those levels. And that's something that would still be done during the maintenance year. And if I may, I'll give Amy Mercer, our city assessor, some kudos here. She's really good about understanding levy limits and the importance of net new construction. It's like my family, we put on a deck, and she made sure to include that as part of net new construction, because it's new construction. It's not a house, but it's still new construction. And they're little amounts, but they add up. And at this point, we will take every amount that we can get.
We do have a question from our Zoom. Gabriella, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Misty, I was curious, referendums are possible to fund things if people vote for it. Does that have to be for a specific item? And then does that carry forward in future years in terms of calculating the levy limit?
Yeah, so the levy limit has very specific rules on what has to be included in the referendum language. And they changed it recently, so I don't remember exactly what it is, but it does have to be for a specific purpose and identified exactly how much it will be, and then whether it's ongoing or if it's one time. So all of those specifics have to be laid out, very similar to a school referendum.
And then does a referendum get on the ballot by a vote from the council, or is it typically generated from the public?
So this would be a city clerk question, but I believe it would be a vote from the council. Aaron, do you know?
I think so. Jay probably knows better than me because you're here for the library.
We looked into this a couple of times, and it's a difficult process because you're just getting the information from the state about what our equalized valuation is going to be. And we have budget presentations that are just beginning, but then we have property tax bills that have to go out at the beginning of December. So if there's going to be a referendum, we have in this short amount of time between the beginning of August and whenever the referendum would be, which would probably be in November, we've got, only a few weeks because you've got to notice the referendum. I think it's got to be 6 weeks.
So it used to be that you had to wait till you had your values in August, and it was going to always then be the November election, which you're right, timing is terrible. Like, that's when we're passing our budget. One of the things I know they changed in it is you can do it based on estimates instead. So we can do it at an earlier vote now. I don't know how that works, though, if your estimate is wrong, right?
Well, at the end of the day, the council can call for an election, which is what a referendum is. We can call for an election on something like that at any time. But if we're trying to make a case to the public about why this needs to be done, we have to have enough time to get all of that information out to the public in order to make it happen. And in order for the bills to get printed up by the 1st of December, that referendum's probably got to be passed the first week in November. And so the amount of time, the time crunch that's required to make all this happen is really, really difficult. The school districts seem to have more flexibility because their fiscal year, so our fiscal year runs from January to December. The school district's fiscal year runs from the 1st of July to June. So they get all that valuation information previously, and then they've got time. They've got lots of time before the budget to be able to get all that stuff out. But for municipalities, it's really difficult.
And so if that's something the council is interested in exploring, we could. So the nice thing about that law change is we could do it with the April election or the August election. But again, some logistics would have to get figured out. And school referendums, in my view, part of the reason why they are so successful is because they have such strong marketing campaigns behind them. You know, they're really good about getting the information out and making sure people understand it, and that costs money. So I don't know that we would have the resources to do the public information campaign that we would need to do in order for it to be successful. So not that we shouldn't do it, but it's a logistic piece that we'd have to make sure we kept in mind.
Well, business says you need to spend money to make money, so.
Well, it's harder to do this for the operating budget. We did a referendum for the library. But that was a referendum run by the city, and the city put some money into marketing that. But the people who contributed to the library board before the library was built, I think they raised, and I contributed some money to that fund also. I think it was something on the order of $200,000 or $300,000 that they raised independently and sent out a number of full-color printed brochures to the residents prior to the referendum to get it passed. I think and what happens with the school districts is you've got teachers' unions and you've got other unions who are spending money to get these referenda passed. I think it's a hard sell to tell the taxpayers, you know what, we want to have a referenda, and we're going to spend $200,000 of taxpayer money to convince you to pay for the referendum.
We are going to increase your taxes.
Right, that's the big kicker.
Exactly.
Pitchforks and torches.
So that goes to my point that while it is an option, I don't know that it's a realistic option. Right. So my view of the world, I think levy limits should go away and you should be able to make your own decisions. But these are the cards that were handed. There's also is this adjustment under the blue section. This is the one where we will get the levy limit adjustment for the town based on what the town taxes are. We've had this conversation already, so that it'll be much less than what we probably spend. This is the one I know that we'll be able to be eligible for. I'm talking to the state about if there's the transfer of service one, some way that we could work that in there too. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll be able to figure out this quandary that we're in, but you just never know.
Have you talked to the City of Madison finance director to see how they are doing that too, how they are interpreting? Because I imagine Madison is they're going to receive a bigger portion of the town, so so maybe they are doing the same analysis that you are doing, and so I don't know.
Right, not as much as I would have liked to. So I will say I'm very much so behind the 8 ball with everything that's been going on, but more conversations need to happen for sure. And then working with the Department of Revenue really is the key, because they're going to be the ones that have to sign off on it. So Madison and I can come in and say, hey, this is what we want to do, and the Department of Revenue can say, never mind. So we need to work with them as well. And I know that's something I need to get moving on over the next couple months. Okay. So while we're talking about levy limits, you probably recognize this teeter-totter from last time. So in my view of the world, the levy limits, you would need about 2 to 3% of net new construction to meet the 2 to 3% of what inflation is, of just increasing cost for status quo, not changing service levels at all, just keeping everything there. And it does take a pretty fair amount of net new construction to get to even those levels. This year, I think we'll be at that 5.2% ballpark, which does give us an extra $450,000 that we can spend from that additional amount. Is not a lot of money, $450,000. So we'll talk about some of these going forward, but we know Town of Madison is a huge piece on its own.
That's the $450,000, that's a net increase?
So that's the difference from the 5.2% of net new construction I think it's going to be to the 3% that we need for kind of cost to continue
So the
generalities.
3% includes things like increased wages for staff for longevity, or the increase in the electric bill, or whatever.
Yep, ballpark, big picture, inflation is 2 to 3%, yes. Obviously, there'll be some nuances in there. I mean, not everything goes up by that same amount. Health insurance, for example, is often higher. But. So Town of Madison, we spent a lot of time talking about this back in May. I don't have too much more information than I did back then, but we know that this is going to be a problem. And this is where that timing issue is going to be impacted, because we're going to get that levy limit adjustment if it's the one I know we're going to qualify. We won't get that levy limit adjustment until 2023, and it's $760,000. Also, the property tax payments from the residents will come for the 2023 budget. State aids that the town is going to get needs to be allocated between us and the city of Madison. Department of Revenue says they're working with the Department of Administration to try to figure out how that's going to all be done, but they don't have good information for me at this point. So in conservativeness, I'm just assuming we won't get anything until 2023, based on when payments are made.
But they're establishing, the Department of Revenue is establishing that split?
With the Department of Administration.
Okay.
Yep. Hopefully we'll get that information soon. They said once the values are out, which is end of this week, they're hopeful they can get back to that project.
Okay.
The thing that we did do to try to help us set up for that is the timing it with the TID closure. So there's the TID 4 closure, which is the one City Hall and up to the interchange. And then there's the TID 6 closure, which is out by Target, Orchard Point 1. Originally, a couple years ago, I thought we'd be able to time both of those closures with the Town of Madison and everything would be great and, wouldn't be a problem. The TID 4 closure is being delayed because of that railroad crossing that needs to get done. So the earliest that could be affected is probably the 2024 budget, maybe the 2025 budget. And then the TID 6 closure is affected because we have an outstanding assessment claim that we're hoping to get resolved soon. We missed the date. April 15th is the magic date for all of this, so we definitely won't get the levy limit adjustment for 2022 budget. Maybe court will get caught up and we'll be able to get that in the 2023 budget, but it's also possible that will be 24, 25 too. So this is where timing really is just what's going to get us, right? All the costs for the Town of Madison are happening now or very soon, but all of the money that's supposed to help us pay for those is coming later. And so that's the big question that we have to figure out. This chart here is those positions that were identified with the Town of Madison CIP. This is the same chart you saw before, except for the last line, which is the one that council approved last night as part of the CIP. All of these positions adds up to roughly $1.5 million. So if you thought we had, or remember we had $450,000 this year of additional net new construction flexibility, and then we're going to get $760,000-ish from the town levy limit adjustment. Those two things don't count for even just the staff that we know that we need.
But we can modify that.
Absolutely.
Budget time.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So how many positions there?
1, 2, so 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'd say 15 because election workers are kind of LTEs.
But we can stagger in this. We can start with the priority, what are the priority staffing, and then we have another, batch of other priority. We can work on that. We can have a plan. We shouldn't hire all of them at the same time.
Right, so how this is laid out right now was kind of it was Aaron's perspective, but what the priority listing was. So we'll go through the budget process, we'll see how much money we have available, and we'll start kind of at number one, work our way down. But then, of course, council has ultimate control through the amendment process, what does and does not get included. But these were the ones that were identified. And then not to spoil it, but you've all seen from other budgets that there's other needs or requests beyond this list that I'm sure you will see again.
But we still don't know how the state's going to view the additional valuation toward our levy limit moving forward.
So however, I know for sure that we qualify for that annexation one. So that's the $760,000 I know we will qualify for with the 2023 budget. There's some glimmer of possibility that maybe there's another one in there, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. And then all of those are consistent going forward, so they're base building. So that 760,000-ish will be available and then inflated as time goes on based on net new.
Well, I have a lot of more detailed questions about the town of Madison, the condition of the buildings there. Do we have the capacity to send property owners notices that they need to get their buildings up to codes before this annexation, or we're going to be doing some pretty serious enforcement?
So I know there's a team of people that are working, and maybe I should let you answer that, Chad, from the town of Madison global perspective.
Could you repeat the question for me just 1 second, Jay? Sorry about that.
Well,
I can answer that if there's money, no.
I have been in some of those buildings, and there are numerous things in those buildings that do not even comply with minimal building codes. So the question is, can we, prior to annexation, put those property owners on notice and tell them that they need to get these taken care of?
I think the safe answer is we don't know, because we don't know what level of authority we'll have there. I think we could potentially do an informational campaign, if that's allowed. And what my intent is in the coming month or so here is put together an internal work group of department heads focusing efforts on the town of Madison and all of the various considerations that the city is going to need to evaluate and plan for, since we're now about 15 months away from this absorption. So, and how I envision that working, and it could certainly be modified, is this core group of department heads will then work with other department heads and city staff to, again, identify those issues. Communication to the town residents and businesses is going to obviously be an important component to that. And also, ideally working with the town of Madison and to some extent the city of Madison to kind of, coordinate our efforts and make sure that all of us are on the same page moving forward. So that is a suggestion that we can take as part of our efforts moving forward and see what we can do in advance to try to get voluntary compliance on things like building code violations.
Julia?
So, Misty, what is the town revenue in taxes?
So that's the $760,000.
Oh, that one is the
The amount that the property owners pay in town taxes
Yeah.
for the 2022 budget, so this next set of bills, that's the amount that we'll get as a levy limit adjustment for the next one.
Okay.
So the 760 is based off of last year's tax bills, so it's still an estimate. We don't know where things are going to shake out, but.
But they do that because that 760 is a town tax mill rate. It's not a city.
Correct.
So do we have another adjustment to bring it to our?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of, so it's based on town taxes. The one thing that's a little unique is generally town taxes are way less than what city taxes are. Town of Madison is actually somewhat comparable. It's in the ballpark at least.
But looking at the staffing requisition, I think we need to look at this and determine what are the priority position, because it's not going to be sustainable to hire all these people, because it's 1.5 million that then is 1.5 million 23, 1.5 million in 24, and you know what I mean? So we need to think like that, you know what I mean? So this is what we need to determine, what is the tax, the money coming from the town, another revenue, share aid from the state that the town get, too, and then to see if we are going to be close or break even, with that.
Exactly. And so in a perfect world, we would hire all these positions all at once because we know the needs are going to be there. It'd be great to be able to service the town residents on day one to the level they would get at the city. I don't know that that's going to be realistic, and that's why you see there's a variety of dates in here going out to 2024. And again, this is just one view of what the priorities are. Council has the ultimate say over that. And I did encourage all of these positions to submit in the paperwork so that council at least had the information for all of them.
So if I'm thinking about this correctly, we won't even know what we're getting into for this budget session that's coming in. I'm understanding that Chad's going to be able to get a group together and meet with I'm pretty sure we're not going to know anything for this budget.
No, we know.
So we have a couple months still before the mayor's proposed budget comes out. That's not till September. My hope is that I can get talking to the Department of Revenue and to the City of Madison soon, and we can figure out some of these logistics. But as far as service levels, I think a lot of that we won't know until we get in there and we figure out what the problems are that we didn't expect. Infrastructure, I realize isn't staffing, but is another great example. I mean, we're going to be responsible for all of those roads. I hope they're in good shape. I don't know that they're in good shape. And just with everything else going on in the city, I don't know that we have the resources to evaluate all of them now. So some of those things will just have to be prioritized and phased in as we go.
Thank you.
Dave, go ahead.
Just from the public works standpoint, maybe Chad knows this. Are they served by the city of Madison for their water? Or I doubt they have their own water system.
I would assume that they are. I don't know that for certain, but I have to believe that they would be based on geographic proximity alone.
Good, so then we won't have to.
So I do know that one for certain.
You do?
The big question is whether or not we need to do an agreement between us and the City of Madison to officially say they will continue to do it.
Okay.
But we have tentative agreement that they will continue to provide water
All right.
to them.
Please do. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Other costs for town of Madison, this is all just from the CIP, the equipment and the supplies, and then the infrastructure that we kind of talked about before too. So I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's going to be a really important conversation as we continue on this. And I do wish I knew all of the answers now, I really do. I just don't know that that's realistic considering the nebulous thing that we're getting.
So when the Town of Madison agreement was signed, one of the other things that I'm sure remained in the agreement was that we were basically getting all their stuff. So we're getting a building on Fish Hatchery Road that we probably aren't going to keep. And we're getting, vehicles, fire engines. Have we done any work into determining what is of value that it's worth keeping and what we should sell off and all that stuff?
So partially. So we do have an appraisal done on the town hall, which is the big piece that we are scheduled to receive through the allocation of assets. The fire equipment actually is disposed of now because the City of Madison does those services. And then I think there's a couple other pieces that are supposed to come to us. The bigger question, though, is not necessarily if we get that piece of equipment, but what the value of that piece of equipment is. Because at the end of the day, we have to look at how much Town of Madison has in assets, how much they owe, because they are still, paying costs and issuing debt. And then whatever that difference is, both us and the City of Madison will either receive those things or have to make payments for it. There is a default formula in there that you're probably remembering, and it's based on the value, I believe. We've talked to the City of Madison about having a conversation about what that looks like, because there is flexibility to come to an agreement outside of that, but if we don't, then that other default agreement would come into play. We were waiting for the 2020 audit to be complete by the town, which probably is by now, I would suspect. So we should start having those conversations soon, too.
My other question was the audited financial statement that they're supposed to be out already, like
They
you
should
mentioned.
be.
And then we can take a look at their, the balance sheet to see whether they have there and the liabilities and long-term loans and all of that stuff.
Exactly. So I have the 2019 one, but I haven't seen 2020 yet, but I
So
also
have
haven't
you
asked
seen
for it.
anything weird there?
I mean, there's things that I don't understand because we don't do it here at the city, I would say, but I suspect there's nothing weird. The big question to me is going to be at the end of it, are we going to have to pay off their debt or are we going to get cash? Like, what's that net result? And I don't know where that's going to land. And I think a lot of it depends on what happens between now and then.
Do we know how much debt they have? Because the assumption that was made when that agreement was signed is that they're going to have a hard time issuing any bonds when anybody who would buy the bonds would know that there's not going to be anyone there to pay them off at some point.
They ended up doing state trust fund loans instead. So I know based on the 2019 audit, I know they were still issuing some debt.
We
I don't know if that's
We
continued.
don't know how much that is.
I need to get that audit, so I'll make sure to ask for it soon, so we can start analyzing that more.
Okay.
Other pressing issues. So first one is the one that Julia brought up briefly with Shannon yesterday. So there is a Fitchburg EMS prior year budgeting error that happened. I'm not going to get into all of the details. Chief Anderson will be here to present during his presentation, like all the rest of the department heads, but at least wanted to get this out there so that you could have it in the back of your mind as another item that we will need to address, similar to the town of Madison. So ultimately what happens, Fitch-Rona does a similar budgeting process as us, where they say this is how much all of our expenses are, this is how much our revenues are, mainly the ambulance run revenue that they charge all of the patients. And whatever that difference is gets allocated to us, the city of Verona, and the town of Verona. So what happened was the run revenue was miscalculated. Really a formula error, for lack of better words. What that means for us, though, is we weren't paying in as much as we should have. So they were unintentionally overinflating their other revenues, which unintentionally deflated how much the rest of us had to pay in. Good news and bad news. Good news is they did have enough reserves built up. So even though this problem actually started in 2019's budget, we didn't have to do anything drastic for 2021 when this was discovered. So that's kind of the good news, that they had that reserves. Bad news, of course, is we're going to have to make up that difference, which is about $160,000, all else equal, in 2022. And then we also need to have a conversation about how to build those reserves back up. You know, they shouldn't be running such a tight ship, especially considering the volatility of ambulance run revenues. They need to have some reserves there too. So we won't come up with that strategy for 2022. 2022 budget, we just need to fill that hole and then figure out the reserves thing for 2023 and beyond. So that's a pretty significant item that we'll need to figure out too.
Yes, you may. Go ahead, Julia.
I don't understand, because you mentioned that they have enough reserve to cover, why we need to still to pay 160.
So $160,000 is just what we, for 2022, when we fix that formula error, our costs will go up $160,000.
That one is the money that we should have paid last year in the budget that we need to pay, no?
No, this is just making us back to where we should be for 2022.
So, but this is, I don't understand why if they have enough reserve, we need to pay, why they don't take all the whole money from the reserve? I don't understand why we still need to pay more money, so they don't have enough reserve to cover the deficit.
So they spent the reserves. So in 2019, 2020, and 2021, when this was a problem, and they weren't collecting enough from all of us that they should be,
were taking the
they
money
spent
from
all of the reserves. Yep. And so now for 2022, when we fix that formula error, our just allocation is going to go up $160,000. Then the next conversation is backfilling those reserves that they had spent before to get them some flexibility.
It's a follow-up question.
Sure, go ahead.
It was discovered through an audit?
Nope, Patrick Anderson discovered it while he was working on his budget.
Oh.
So 2019 probably should have caught it, but that was when the third ambulance came on, so it was masked. 2020 probably should have caught it, but it was COVID, and all sorts of things were weird during COVID, so, you know, it was missed. But then when he was working on his next one, realized that this error was made and is getting it fixed.
Go ahead, Jake.
So our allocation basically was $160,000 behind, or probably like $130,000 or whatever it was. And they made up for that through the reserve fund. So before this happened, and Fitchburg pays roughly 2/3 of the difference, right?
Of the difference,
Of the difference between the run revenue and the operating expenditures.
yeah, I should know that number, I don't. That sounds about right.
It's probably around there. So,
We pay about half of total.
Okay, all right, that's fine. We'll take half. So that means that the total is about $320,000 then.
Right.
So if this goes back 3 years, then I guess we could, you know, and I'm not asking for exact numbers. I'm just trying to piece together something roughly here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that roughly this is about a $600,000 mistake. So that's what was used out of the reserve fund. So So when Fitchburg started building a reserve fund, and mostly since then, because there was 1 year where we actually budgeted money to put into the reserve fund because it had gotten dangerously low. But for the most part, the reserve fund that we have, the unallocated cash reserve, or whatever terminology we're using for it today, that amount happens through money that we didn't spend through the budgeting process, or let's say we have a police officer who retires, so now we've got a partial year's salary that's not being spent, or through those kind of things. So I guess what I would be reluctant to just budget money to put into a reserve fund. I think that they should find a way. I mean, and they're not going to get $600,000 back in a year. So I think over time, though, the reserve fund will build up because they'll have EMTs that leave, or maybe, the price of gas will go down 1 year and, they won't spend as much money as budgeted. So, I mean, over time, they will rebuild a reserve fund. I guess whenever they do their presentation, if you could communicate that we should have some information on what it will take to make that happen if we don't do anything to replenish that.
So I don't think his intention is to start replenishing it with the 2022 budget. I think he expects that this 160,000 for us is enough of a sticker shock that we don't want to add additional onto that to start building it up right away. So I'm sure he has kind of thoughts in his mind about what he's thinking about for options. I know the natural vacancies and things like that is a great way to build reserves, but you can also purposefully put money aside for it. And I think that's my guess on what they intend to do, at least for a small amount of it, because revenue is so volatile in their industry. And then, so we do have a fair amount of reserves too, but I think it's important that we do whatever is agreed upon through the district, because I don't want us to pay in something that's different than what Verona pays in, right? So we want to make sure that that's done the right way.
I want to understand, because this Fitcherona EMS is function as their own district organization. So why we need to replenish their reserve? You know what I mean? So they made a mistake. So now we're paying. So maybe they need to go through also they need to look at what is in the pipeline of capital expenditure that they have in the next couple of 5 years and determine what should be the priority, and they should be determine if there's something that they need to delay, or maybe they need to look at the budget and determine where the area where they need to reduce cost. You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? Because it's not fair for us to pay the price for a mistake that they made. And we don't have any control about that, you know what I mean? So, I want to know, why do we need to replenish their reserve?
So ultimately, Fitcherona is us, right? So all of their money, similar to how all of our money comes from our taxpayers, all of Fitcherona's money comes from either the revenue reserves or one of the 3 municipalities. So their way of finding other money would be to come to where they get their money from. I know that Patrick did look at his budget, and I expect that his request will be very streamlined compared to what it could be. I know he's talked about, not doing an intern and things like that, but at some point, ambulance services is a critical service that we provide to our residents, and we don't want to skimp on that either. So we will see. I actually don't have his numbers yet because we have an arrangement. I don't want to see it until those equalized value numbers come out at the end of the week. So I'll know more soon. But he owns that it was a mistake and wishes it didn't happen, just like we do. But at this point, I don't know that there's much that we can do about it other than acknowledge we underpaid those other 3 years. And now we need to pay what we are supposed to be paying based on the arrangement. And it's not just us. The city of Verona has the same problem as what we do.
160 is our part.
Just ours.
It's maybe Verona is maybe 150, 140.
Exactly. And then the town of Verona will have a piece as well. Yep. Another issue with Fitcherona So that net cost is allocated between the three of us municipalities. Last year, the state made a $100 million error in the Verona equalized value. So when we allocate out the cost from last year, Verona's share was artificially too high. So now what the state is going to do for this year's budget is they're going to double it. So they're going to take $200 million out of the Verona equalized value allocation. So as theirs drops, ours will go up. It is only $30,000 though, so we don't, I mean, only, right? It's at least not more than that. And then it will even out after that. So the state always doubles it to make up for the year before, and then it goes back to even. So 30,000 one year. And then honestly, I'm a little nervous about the values that come out end of this week too. Fitchburg's growing like crazy, right? We have been the fastest growing community in this, or third in the state and highest in Dane County. If we are growing faster than what Verona is growing, then that will shift more cost to us, rightfully, right? We have more residents, we have more service. I'm not arguing about the validity of that, but just from a math perspective, there might be more costs coming to Fitchburg because of that formula as well. Other bad news, Metro Transit. So we all know Metro Transit is planning to increase. We may have some flexibility for the 2022 budget because of the CARES funding that they received. Metro is working with all of their different partners to come up with a funding model that will keep us flat for 2022, but then we will see a very significant increase in 2023. So in my perfect world, we would account for that and plan for that. But knowing that we have this timing issue there, I think we probably need to take advantage of that structural deficit and hope that things work out in 2023, or do our best to make things work out in 2023. But that one's looming as well.
I have a question regarding Metro Transit. I remember like 1 or 2 years ago, we were planning to do an analysis to what was the option for the city, if we are going to continue the partnership with Metro Transit or which are the other options. Where is that plan right now? Have we done anything?
Yep, so Andrew McFadden is taking point on that. And then Gabriella, you're on the committee, aren't you? I don't know if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
So I know they're working on that, and that's part of this funding model discussion that they're talking about. And I don't know that it's an either or issue. I think council ultimately will have to make the decision, but maybe we do Metro and we do something on our own, or maybe it's just one or the other. I mean, there's a lot of different ways things can be done still at this point, and they're working through those details. But we know the cost is going up. Sorry.
This is Gabriella. Could I just say something quickly, Randy?
Yes, go ahead, Gabriella.
I just want to say that my understanding, I actually missed the last partner meeting with Metro, unfortunately, but my understanding is that there is a plan in the works. It's not 100% ready for public discussion, but if anyone's interested in hearing a little bit more about what's happened in those meetings to date, I'm happy to sit down with any of you individually to talk you through it. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk more publicly about it very, very soon.
Next one would be the other staffing requests. So I kind of mentioned this before, but as you've seen through other budgets, there were other requests made that did not make that list of the ones that we looked at before. So I suspect you'll continue to see those for this coming year. And then insurance rates are expected to go up 10 to 20%.
No way.
Plus we're having a lot of lawsuits filed against us, which obviously has a cost. So there's a lot of things that are kind of going against us this coming year. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. This is why I went last. Good news, though, COVID, we made a lot of adjustments for COVID with the 2021 budget. Things really seem to be going back on that, with the exception of interest revenue. The market for interest is still terrible, but programming is still very strong. Building permits continue to be very strong. There's a lot of things that we really are doing well at. So it's interesting that we're having this conversation. You know, there's a lot of big numbers coming through. I talk to any of my peers and they say, but you have a 5.2% net new construction. What are you complaining about, right? Like, these are the conversations that most municipalities have every year. So I really do think the planning that we've done in the past to get us to this point has helped us. And while this is a critical moment, at least we have some options that we can use to do it. So then, teetered all the way over. These are some of the adjustments, a little bit more detailed. I talked already about the big question I have with the Department of Revenue, trying to figure that out. Hopefully we'll know soon. There also is a provision to carry over unused levy limit capacity from one year to the next, which in past 6 years, that has been a strategy that we've used. But for those of you that were involved in the 2021 budget, you'll remember that we only had $797 left in our levy limit capacity. And then because this has been asked of me before after these meetings, I just included it on here. So this is the last 6 years, what the levy limit capacity was, both at the mayor's proposed budget level and then the adopted at the end of the process. So just wanted to share that.
Sure, go ahead.
You mentioned that these cities, there are a couple of legal issues, So can we know which are those and how much is, or is kind of like a confidential information?
So part of the conversation is the city has an internal service fund now for our insurance company, and we are self-insured for a relatively small amount, which was a new strategy for us recently. So that is costing us more than I'd say we expected at the time. So still working through some of those. We'll have more details when the insurance budget is prepared for you. The levy limit adjustments that are coming, the other big one is that TID closure that I talked about. So TID 6 will be about $400,000. I'm hopeful we can do that for the 2023 budget. TID 4 will be a $700,000-ish levy limit adjustment. I'm hoping for that in 2024. And then when we take over the town, there's a TID there that the plan right now is we will just get that TID as part of the city, even though we don't meet our 12% test, which is very nice. But then we want to close that TID as fast as we can. And it's a relatively small adjustment. It's $90,000 ballpark. But when we had $797 last year, we'll take whatever we can get.
That's the Alexander TID?
Correct.
That's still open, huh?
It is, and there actually is an agreement that the city entered for one of the buildings, I don't recall which one, that we will continue to make payments under certain conditions after it becomes part of the city of Fitchburg. So we will evaluate that to make sure, first, that we have to make those payments, and then pay those off as fast as we can to get that to close.
Boy, I seem to remember one of the provisions so towns traditionally didn't have the capacity to have TIDs. And the town of Madison specifically got a statute change to make that one happen. But I seem to remember the provision of the original agreement was that TID was supposed to close before the transfer.
Turns out it's good for us that it doesn't, because the town taxes that the TID properties are paying to the town come into us as a levy limit adjustment, and then we get to take an additional levy limit adjustment when we close the TID. So to an extent, it's kind of nice that it's coming over to us. And then the city did agree for some building, I wish I remembered which one it was, that we really wanted that to happen, and we agreed to make payments after it came over. So that was an intentional decision by the council. Included a couple other resources in here for you. So now this is where I get to the uncomfortable, but this is probably how we're going to have to do it in order to make this work. So normally I would talk about how much I hate structural deficits and how terrible they are, and I still 100% agree with that. With an asterisk this year, that against my better judgment, I think this is what we're going to have to do. I don't like it. I think we need to be exceptionally cautious as we're doing it. And it's highly unusual circumstances. How often do you take over an entire town and have this timing issue because of just how the timing works for all of it? So I think this is what we need to do. I think I can pitch it to the public and to Moody's about why we are doing this. But we do need to take extreme caution as we're doing it. So first, what is a structural deficit? So it's basically making a commitment that's not fully funded or ignoring what that future financial impact is. So examples of them here are mid-year hiring without leaving that room to pay for the full year of the position the year after, using fund balance for ongoing operations, delaying financial impact of something without leaving room again in that levy limit capacity, or budgeting for one-time large savings or revenues. So those are the 4 classic examples. I'm very proud that we haven't been doing those lately. So this really pains me to say that I think we probably should consider it. A reason why they're a bad idea, so really that when you do that, you're committing future councils and future budgets to follow through on the decisions that you made, even though you hadn't planned for them. And it creates that unfunded hole in future years. And as we bump up against levy limits, it becomes even more of a problem. So, at the beginning of that chart I showed you before, we had $1.7 million of levy limit capacity. Back then, structural deficits weren't good still, but at least we knew it wasn't going to set us up for a huge problem in the future. We just pre-spent it. Now having $800 in there, if we don't plan for these things, we're going to get ourselves into a bind. And it's really just kicking that can down the road.
Go ahead, Jim.
So what is the worst that Moody's could say when they see a structural deficit?
So I hope they're going to say, we feel really strongly in your financial management and understand the plan that you have in place and the reason why and how you're addressing it in the future, and they will not downgrade us or make any public comments about it. Worst case scenario is they could say, we are mismanaging our finances and downgrade us and put that word out there. I really think, I really think because of the situation, I think we can justify it as long as we treat it as a multi-year plan. We have to make sure we're matching our structural deficits with our future capacity, and we're not overextending ourselves in the long run.
I think, what we do in 2023's budget really will ultimately determine what Moody's does to us, because if we have this plan and we follow through with it, then, all right, did your plan, cool.
Right.
But if we then have structural deficits again the year after, and the year after, and the year after, wait a minute, now you're relying on structural deficits. That's not sound financial management. And, the biggest problem and why you don't want to do structural deficits is now for the 2023 budget, we put ourselves in a hole that is we've handcuffed ourselves. And so we're essentially kind of doing a 2-year budget this year because we have to essentially pay off or fill that hole that we've created. And, hopefully we still have really strong growth, and we think we are going to, but we've handcuffed ourselves, and that's why projects are probably going to have to get delayed, I would think. We'll see what happens, but ultimately, we're handcuffing ourselves for 2023.
Jay?
See, I know when we were involved with getting our bond rating upgraded a couple of times, Moody's doesn't really care about certain things. So, for instance, the mid-year hiring without room in the levy limit. If you're hiring one person, Moody's is going to look at that and just look at that as incidental in our budget of almost $20 million or a little over $20 million. Because you're talking about, $30,000, $40,000, that's not an issue. If you start siphoning off fund balance in large amounts to use for ongoing expenditures, that's a problem. And they'll definitely have an issue with that. But see, and I don't want to rehash this, but I just want to bring up, back in 2010 and 11, we started having conversations with the leadership of the town of Madison, because what I wanted to do, since at that time we had 10 years, what I wanted to do was to start slowly moving those services over to Fitchburg and having the town of Madison contract with us. So my idea was to start, let's start transferring over building inspection. Let's start transferring over some other services that the town provides. And so eventually, we would today have most of that staffing here already, and we wouldn't be looking at 14 new positions. But once, after 2011, all those plans got dropped, so now we're here. So unfortunately, this is the path that we're on now, and hopefully we can work our way through it. And some of what you've said tonight is a little disturbing, but some of it's also, some of it also makes me think it's not going to be quite as bad as I thought it was.
For this to an extent. We don't know all of the unknowns, but we've made good financial decisions up until now. So things like using the fund balance for ongoing operations, honestly, that's one of the things I think we might have to do to pay for some of those staffing positions. That is the biggest no-no that there is in public finance or any finance. But because we're doing it for this short time and we're gonna demonstrate that 2023, we will get that capacity, I think it might be okay. But we need to make sure we're matching that up and using long-term, the full year plan and show that we're being responsible.
We've had some conversations, at least in the last few years, about various departments and parts of the town coming over, and they always say, well, sure, if you double the payouts, and they want a whole heck of a lot of money, and we just kind of said, well, that's ridiculous. weren't very, they weren't really willing to do a whole lot, unfortunately.
Julia, you had a question?
Yeah, so you mentioned about, maybe we need to use general fund to, cover some of the staffing cost. And then you see that maybe we can create capacity the following year. So how do you anticipate creating that capacity? From where that capacity is going to come from?
So that's that levy limit adjustment we're gonna get in the 2023 budget.
$760,000.
Right, and that's where we're gonna have to make sure we're balancing. These are the structural deficits we are entering into, and these are the exact levy limit adjustments we are expecting to get and when, and demonstrate that those match. Or, favorably don't match. But we can't unfavorably not match. We can't overspend our structural deficits expecting, white horses to come in and save us in the long run. We need to be very cautious about what we approve. So this is why I think it might be okay this year. So it's that timing issue with the levy limit adjustment from the town of Madison, the timing issue with the closure of TID 6, and the timing issue of TID 4. So while the using fund balance for staffing mid-year positions is huge no-nos, if we're showing that it is just for this year and we have a plan to address it in the following year very clearly and committedly, I think it will be okay. Similar on the capital side, right? So in the CIP, we have those upfront costs of, say, the plow, for example. So we have in the CIP that we will use fund balance to pay for that upfront plow. But then we set up using property tax levy, the replacement fund, to show that we will set it aside for the future. So I think that's a really good way that we can demonstrate that we recognize this isn't something we want to do, but we set ourselves up to make sure this is one time and not a habit that we're getting into. And I think we just need to be very thoughtful and fully documented and fully transparent about this is what we're doing and why and how we know it will work out in the end. So structural deficits I think we should consider would be the partial year hires for 2022. Not all of the positions need to be hired as of the first of the year. Maybe they can be hired as of July 1st or October 1st or something like that, only budget for the 2 months. But recognizing that next year we will have to pay the full year, but that will match with that levy limit adjustment we're getting. So that's back to that matching of the timing. We just talked about using the fund balance to pay for the upfront capital cost. And then we talked about the fund balance possibly for the 2022 staffing costs also. Again, in a very clear, deliberate, intentioned, planned way. And so caution, we need to be extremely cautious to match those up.
So our policy was that we were going to keep fund balance between 15 and 25% of operating expenditures. What is the fund balance right now, roughly?
So we are just over 30%. So 30% is what Moody's looks at for a AAA, which is what we keep working towards. Based on very, very rough numbers for 2022, I think we will still be above that 30%, even doing this use of fund balance. Another reason why I think we can pitch it, we're being very thoughtful, but it also is the amount that's in excess of our policy. That is an acceptable thing in certain situations.
Go ahead, Julia.
Now I am looking at 2024.
Yikes.
Okay? So we don't have the adjustment.
So the 760,000 is base building. So that 760,000 stays every year.
No, I know, but
Okay.
it's gonna cover half of our staffing, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So I am looking at 2024 and say, okay, so we hope that our new construction continue, percentage continue to increase, or what are the other strategies that we are gonna use to.
Right. I don't want to say that we're relying on net new construction to stay high, because that is riskier than what I feel comfortable saying, especially with COVID and lumber prices and all the other things we've heard about. The reason why I think we're okay, or as long as we're constrained, is that TID 6 closure for the 400,000 and the TID 4 closure of 700,000. So between those three items, plus the town levy limit adjustment, and then a little bit of extra capacity this year, I think we'll be able to get through. But that does mean we don't have, usually when you close a TID, that's your opportunity to catch up, right? So you constrain spending and you get by with what you have until the TID closes, and then you go up to the staffing levels that you really should be at. And unfortunately, I think our TID closure, I don't want to call it a windfall, but our TID closure benefit is going to have to be redirected to these other issues.
I have another question. Can I answer another question?
Yes, go ahead.
Do you know if there are the inventory, well, I don't know if you know that, but there should be inventory of land there in the town of Madison that maybe this is gonna be city property, or, belongs to the city that we can, if we need, in the worst case scenario, sell, land to cover some of those expenses.
So we will get assets as part of it, but we also might owe money, for whatever debt is still outstanding from the town, and that is still to be determined. I know the plan is that we'll get Southdale, is it Southdale Park? Is that the name of it? That will become city, but that park is important for that neighborhood. I'm not aware of other town-owned land there. There is development opportunity. The town of Madison is not all doom and gloom, right? There is a lot of opportunity there too, but in the short term, we're gonna have to restrain ourselves to make sure we can get through to see the good side.
If the town owns more land in the area where we are getting.
Yeah, so I have a list of all of the parcels that are coming to us. I don't recall there being other ones for the town of Madison, but I can look at that too and just double check. Where are we? Okay, we're through the bad news. Let's talk about process. Process is much more fun. So 2022 operating budget, we do have a new budget this coming year for that ARPA funding. So one of the ways to make sure that the ARPA funding doesn't affect our expenditure restraint and our levy limit calculations unnecessarily is to set up the separate special revenue fund. So we do have that set up. And then there will be opportunities for us to, maybe fund projects using that funding to help alleviate some needs on the levy. So that is a conversation we will be having soon. Budget process, the overall process is very similar to other years. So there will be the same accomplishments and goals, the narratives, new proposals for any staffing requests that are in there. I talk in here about the process. I won't get into that too much, but ultimately department heads submit the information to me. I compile it. There's a lot of meetings that talks about priorities and why and what and all of that. Aaron puts out his mayor's proposed budget, similar to CIP, and then you guys all have the opportunity to put in your amendments after that, and then we'll vote on them, very similar to the CIP. The only big difference in the process is that with the council amendments for CIP, we have the discussion on the amendments the same night that we vote on the amendments. Because in theory, CIP amendments are much more reduced. It's not as high stakes and not as controversial. So we can do that all in one night. Budget, especially knowing there's going to be some pretty significant conversations that need to happen. And even other years, budget is just more high stakes. So we actually have the committee of the whole meeting in October that the only agenda item is to talk about the amendments. So the person who sponsors it will share their amendment, and all of you can have your questions answered, you can have your discussion, and you can talk about priorities at that committee of the whole meeting. But you won't actually vote on them. The vote needs to happen at a council meeting, which will be the first meeting in November. Now, the way to try to get the council meeting to not go as long, I mean, CIP took us till 1 a.m., right? Imagine how long budget will take us if we do all of that in one night. So the way that we try to streamline the night of the votes is in our ordinances, there are rules that talk about what can happen with the amendments. So debate is limited, so it's 5 minutes per amendment, including amendments to the amendments. Council can extend that, but it takes a vote to extend it. And then each council person, this is the key, each council person can only speak twice per amendment. And again, that includes amendments to the amendments. So the goal here is that you get all of your discussion and all of your prioritization and all of your questions answered at the committee of the whole meeting, so that when we come to the council meeting, you just say, I think this is good or bad, and I'm going to vote this way because, if you even want to, and then we vote. Make amendments to change it if you want to, and then just vote. So try to keep it very succinct and organized and go down each time.
I'm trying to remember, is the time for us limited for us to speak? Is there a time limit on that?
So the night of the vote at the council meeting, yes. So it's 5 minutes per amendment total for all of you. So it's not like Randy gets 5 minutes and then Julia gets 5 minutes. It would be all of you have 5 minutes to talk about each amendment.
Where were you last night with this?
Well,
The committee of the whole meeting will be long.
one person can take all 5 minutes. I've seen a person introduce their amendment and use the whole 5 minutes.
Sure.
And you can vote to extend it, which,
This is in the
Last-
ordinance.
yeah, a number of years,
I do remember.
as far as I've been around. I think.
Yeah.
Maybe we already went ready to vote, I don't know.
I actually wrote that section of the ordinance the year that Dick Zock offered 26 amendments all by himself.
All by
We
himself.
had over 40 budget amendments that year. And that year, we had to break it into 2 nights because we were here, you wouldn't know. I'm looking at you, but you would have no idea. We were here till like 2 a.m. on Tuesday, and then we had to come back on Wednesday to finish it up, and we were still here till 11 or 11:30 on Wednesday.
And it does get long, so there's been years where we've had 72 amendments. And you figure even 5 minutes times 72 amendments, not to mention all of the other business that you guys have to do as well. That does make for a long meeting. That being said, this is important, right? I don't want you to not make good decisions because of the time crunch. That's why we have that October Committee of the Whole, where we can have as much conversation as we want, and then the public hearing as well. There's also then at the end of that a closing statement opportunity, so everybody can talk about whether they do or do not like the budget overall. And then the other key thing, I think, is that floor amendments are not allowed. So similar to CIP, the council has to submit their amendments in writing ahead of time. That way we can, have staff look at them to see if there's background that needs to be considered. We can also get that out to the public, make sure the public knows what you're voting on. They're considered vetted at that point. So the only amendments that we will consider are ones that were submitted ahead of time. Now, you can make amendments to the amendments, similar to how we did last night with CIP. That is allowed, no problem. We at least need to limit the scope to just the things that are on those amendments, so that the public knows if it's something that they want to make sure that their voice is heard about. Now, we added a little bit extra steps into the process in the past few years that supplement the ordinances because of this levy limit problem that we're having. The process is relatively similar. The difference is, once we go through all of the amendments the first time, if we don't have a budget that meets levy limits, we need to have an opportunity to go back and re-vote on some of those other amendments. So one of the first things we'll do at the beginning of the budget adoption night is we will approve a process, which is what I've got up on the screen too from last year, just so that everybody knows what the ground rules are and what to expect for the night. Then we'll do the traditional process through ordinance. We will take a recess. I will calculate, confer with the city clerk to make sure my numbers are, that your votes are right and all of that is fine. If we have a budget that meets levy limits, we can go home for the night. If we don't, then we will go into step 4, which is possible reconsideration of council amendments. So still nothing new from the floor. You will just be able to say, hey, I want to look again at number 4. I want to reconsider whether or not we should have made the vote that we did on that one. So there's very specific rules in our quite in line with the ordinance rules. So each person can only speak once at that point, and then total discussion is limited to 5 minutes. After we kind of have that mulligan round, we would then take another recess. I would calculate again. If we meet levy limits, we can all go home for the night. If we don't, we would do it again, right? And so we would just keep having an opportunity to reconsider the amendments that were in the packet over and over again until you get to a budget that passes. Exactly. The nice thing is, when you do the mulligan round, you don't have to do all of the amendments. So you would just say, I want to do this one, or I want to do that one. It's not like we will go through all of them again, which is somewhat helpful. Other than that, the process is the same. So we'll go through the amendments. You'll have your closing statements. You will adopt the budget resolution, which passes the budget overall. And then there is a process in the ordinances for a mayor veto and a council override. So that is in the ordinances as well. I'll put that here. Big key here is that the mayor can delete a dollar amount and he can substitute a lower dollar amount, but he cannot add things into the budget through veto. And then it does take a 2/3 vote by council to override that veto.
That's actually, that actually should be clarified. So if there is a council amendment to delete something from the budget and that passes, the mayor cannot veto that amendment and add it back in.
Correct. So he's looking at the final adopted budget, and he can pull things out of there. So he's not looking at the amendments, and he could do, frankly, anything in the budget. Yep. So that was all my bad news bears stuff. So at this point, if you would like, we can do a conversation about kind of what your priorities are for the budget. I hope that it is limit the number of structural deficits that we have and make sure we're planning for the future and accounting for all of our decisions. But obviously, we can open that up for the floor for the rest of that too. Or a great one, are there services we're providing that you don't think we should? I mean, that's another way to reduce the budget. I'm hearing crickets.
Well,
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say thank you for the guidance, everyone.
Yeah, right now, if you want to have a conversation.
Oh, I thought that this is that we can send to the mayor in an email.
So it's better to do it on the floor while we're in a public
Take
meeting?
a picture of that so I can send my opinion in an email.
I have something to say if this is Gabriella.
Jim had his hand up first, so go ahead, Jim, then Gabriella.
well, Misty, I want to thank you for your work, and I want to thank you for giving us this presentation. And I just want to let you know that I'm taking it very seriously, and I'm going to be more on the cautionary side. With the town of Madison coming in with a structural deficit with, like you, I do not like at all. And I hope that, this is only a one-time thing, because, once you open that door, sometimes people think that you should open it more and more and more, and it doesn't close again. So, thank you.
Gabriella, go ahead.
I'll just say that I was really pleased that last night we got the solar panels at the lift station in the CIP. And just wanted to say that if it doesn't make it in the budget, I hope it does make it in your budget proposal, Mayor. But if it doesn't, I will plan to bring an amendment and bring more detail. But if it's helpful for me to gather details in advance to help make the decision about adding that into the budget at the outset, I would be happy to provide that. So Mayor Richardson, just let me know if you'd like that information.
Julia.
So, so my question, my recommendation to Aaron is that you continue funding the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative, because if you cut any, I'm gonna bring an amendment. Because we saw a presentation tonight that the program is still in phase 1, but we are making some progress in our underserved areas that we need to pay attention. So my other recommendation to you, if you are going to try to delay or cut some amendment or project that I am involved, please let me know in advance I don't want to be a surprise, I will appreciate that. So I can come prepared with an amendment and information. And regarding the services that we provide, I would say that I think one of my biggest concerns that I have right now is, we are growing and adding more neighborhoods and more parkland and more parks. So, the other thing that we need to look, I would like to know when the head of the department prepare. I know that I prepared that, but like a trend, okay, we have been working, like an example from parkland. Sorry, I am still sleepy from 9. I went to bed like at 3 o'clock and wake up at 6, so I am still. So on a couple of parks, we add in the last 10 years X amount of parks or land park. In the last 10 years, we add how many staffing? We are using the same number of staff 5 years, and we increase 20-30% our parkland that we need to take care. So I would like to see that in the presentation when the head of the department put that, what it has been the growth. Like another example I can give you, like economic development, economic development has grown in the last 10 years, the amount of work, for example, Mike and Joe are putting, but they are the only two. And that department has been only 2 persons for, I don't know, since I remember. So we need to know, when we do the staffing calculation, we need to take in consideration the growth on the workload, the growth on park or units, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And I would like to have that more like a visual, when they do that, present the summary, because that one is going to be, especially if we need to vote for some staffing, new staffing, is, okay, they really need it, you know what I mean? Like, this is how they have grown, the city has grown, or assessing, the assessing department. They always come and they ask for a person. Show me what do you need it. I'm going to give you an example. Today I had to put a staffing requisition in my department. I had to show the head of the department, why do I need that person with hours? What this person is going to do? How many hours is going to work? Show me the number that you really need that. And this is what we should do with the staffing. It's better for us as an elder to make a better decision because we say, oh, yeah, they really need that because they haven't grown. They are the same staff in the last 10 years. So it's going to make us I want to feel more comfortable saying, yes, we really need it because the numbers are backing those. You know what I mean? Especially in hiring new staff.
Yep. And that's a great idea I can add. So it's too late for this year, but I'll make a note for next year to add to the actual form, too.
Yeah.
Some statistics
Yeah.
right there. So we have on the executive summary, but that's only
yeah.
5 years, not the 10. I think that'd be a great addition.
Yeah, because we know the current staffing, but we don't know that current staffing has been the same in the last, you know what I mean?
Not for that long. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that one is a recommendation.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think with the staffing issue, though, I think we need to be cognizant with any staffing issue is what you have your staff do and how you schedule it. So as far as staffing is concerned, the department head has a responsibility to say why they need the staffing, but also we got to look at ourselves and the things that we keep requesting, it takes staffing. So we shouldn't just put it all on the department head, like we talked about with the stormwater projects. We all want to move up, but we got to remember that then we need staffing. And that's on us. That's not on the department head.
Okay.
Jay was next.
I'm going to forget.
Yeah, a suggestion that I'm going to have, not for this year, but probably after the town of Madison, like for maybe the 2024 budget, what I would like to see us do, and I brought up Dick Zock's name earlier, and he had pushed for this for a long time. It never happened, but I would like to have a year where we do a zero-based budget, where we walk in and we assume that the budget of the city of Fitchburg is zero, and we rebuild it.
Oh.
Because right now, basically what's happened is every year, from the time that we became a city in 1983, we kind of cobble things together, And you know, we have systems here that we keep doing the same way just because that's the way they were always been done. When I pushed for getting, you know, last night we had a 482-page agenda packet. And that used to all be printed out. You would get a ream of paper every week for the agenda. And I pushed and finally got that approved, and it saved us over $50,000 just in the cost of printing and everything else. We had to buy some new software, and we had to do a few other things. But the cost, just the cost in the labor of someone sitting there putting these agenda packets together was ridiculous. So I think we could benefit by doing a more comprehensive audit of all of the city departments, determining if the things that we're doing are being done the best way they can. Because I suspect we can probably squeeze some efficiencies out of the operation of City Hall. But it's gonna be an undertaking for sure. And it probably ought to be a capital project. But that, like I said, this is something that's been kind of brewing around in my head for a while, and it'll be something for the future, not right now.
Lean processes has been a big topic of conversation, especially in the last 7 years or so. The state spearheaded a great program with it. I think that would bring benefit to the city as well. You know, each department kind of goes through some example so that they can get their process ideas flowing.
Julie, you had another question?
I was trying to follow up Jim, but I forgot my. Oh, yeah. So yeah, I agree with you that there are some issues that head of department has control, and projects that we can control. But I think all of these stormwater issues, because climate change and all of that, we don't have control, and they are coming, one after another one. You know what I mean? So maybe we need to hire more people in that department. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So if because how much is going to cost consultants? Because sometimes when we don't have a staff capacity, we outsource some of those services to a consulting firm, engineer. And we have done in the past a lot of time. And sometimes the minimum project you start with is $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. I have seen those deals. So the idea is to say, okay, there are things that we are not going to control, or we need to understand what is going to happen in the next 5 years in the stormwater project, And we know that in the pipeline we have Lake Bernie, we have Lake Goose issue, we have all of these other ponds. So who is going to be in charge of that? So maybe it's something that we need to think about. Maybe they need another staff in that department, to be able to do that, because this is a thing that they are very tangible for our residents, okay?
Well, I wasn't against stormwater, I just used that as an example.
No, I know, but I am thinking about that too, because the other thing that we need to think is people sometimes, some residents, when they see stuff tangible, they can see visible, they say, okay, I pay more in taxes, but they are doing this, they are doing that. But sometimes we invest in a lot of infrastructure that are underground, they don't see it, they have to pay it, and then it's a visual thing, you know what I mean? So, and all these stormwater issues are very tangible to our neighbor, because the houses are very, the property are getting affected, the farmland are getting affected, you know what I mean? Is also affecting our roads because they are deteriorating the condition of our road, So I think we need to think what is going to happen with this issue in 5-10 years, you know what I mean? So I think, this is an example of things that we can control and we cannot control, you know what I mean? And this is what is important for me. One of the initiatives, this is one of my initiatives when I ran, was to create a resilient infrastructure plan for the city, to determine what are those infrastructure needs that we are going to have, and to create a plan. And stormwater and how, is one of them, how we are going to, look in the future, in 5 to 10 years, this issue that we have here in the city, and in the climate change, we are going to have more rains, and we are going to have, how it's going to affect our, So that one, it will be a new initiative I'd like to. Number 2 is how we can create like a resilient infrastructure plan that is surrounding climate change and affecting all the areas of the city, not only our agricultural line, not our stormwater, what more climate change is going to change in our life, trees, all of that stuff, So that one is something that maybe we should look in the next 5 to 10 years.
Anything further, Misty?
The only thing I'll say is I spent a lot of time talking tonight about property taxes and levy limits. Obviously, there's also the ability of residents or property owners to pay taxes, which needs to be considered as well. And I'm also realizing now that I don't talk at all about the utilities, right? And so as we're adding projects, stormwater as the example, which is why I'm thinking of it, there is more flexibility in the stormwater fund or the other funds to add additional staff or do additional projects. But just keep in mind that that means the rates are going to be going up to compensate. The money has to come in order for us to spend it. And I know, I think it was the prior council actually that approved, there was the 38% increase in stormwater rates. The residents haven't seen that yet, right? So they know about it, we've been advertising it, but they won't actually notice it till it's in their bill. And that happens in the September bill because the rate increase was effective in July. So I just want to make sure that you're conscious of when you want to do more projects and add staff and do things, which are fantastic, the cost does have to come from somewhere, and that's through rates.
Go ahead, Dave.
Just one real quick thing. On the stormwater, we're going to be approaching Sun Prairie rates, which are the highest in the county. Our taxes are now comparable to Madison. I think people that have lived here for a long time are saying, no, this isn't why we live in Fitchburg. If we want that, we'll move to Madison. So keep that in mind. There is no badge of honor being the highest tax city in the county. Okay, I want to attract people here. Don't think, well, we got to have all these amenities and have our taxes so high.
Nothing else? Very good, Misty. Thank you very much for your time this evening, and you're always a
Thank you, Misty.
world of information. We really do appreciate it.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Announcements. Next committee of the whole meeting, August 25th, 2021. If there's nothing else.
Move for adjournment.
I just want, the next council meeting is the 14th.
I have
August 10th.
I'm talking about committee of the whole.
I am going to be in the Boundary Waters the next council meeting. I just want to make you aware of that I have no Zoom service out in the campsite.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dave. All right. I thought I heard the start of a motion to adjourn.
It actually was an actual motion, and I will make it again. I will move
All
for
right,
adjournment.
and do we have a second?
Second.
All right, motion to second, discussion, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:54 p.m.